Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight for our session for Raleigh City Council. Before we begin, I just want to say that Council Member Buffkin is excused and absent. And I'd also like to welcome some special guests, Boy Scout Troop 395 from White Memorial Presbyterian Church. Could y'all stand up and let us give you a round of applause? Thank you. It's great to have you all back. We missed you during COVID when we had virtual meetings, but it's great to have troops here because you get to see what happens, politically, but also governance in our city. So we really appreciate you being here. Thank you. All right, now we have public comments starting. Before we get into that, I just want to say the next item on the agenda is voicemail public comment. We did not receive anything this meeting. Last meeting we did, and we are actually doing a work session on that, or we got a report from that. Yes. So thank you for following up. Okay. All right. Everybody has 2 minutes, and we will start with Terry Henderson.
Every day, thousands of Raleigh residents are learning about the fraud of Raleigh's missing middle. Hundreds of yellow RestoreRaleighZoning.com signs are all over the city, and they are mute testimony to the people who dare to challenge Mayor Baldwin's notion that Raleigh should be like Portland or Minneapolis. We see the many brush fires over zoning: Laurel Hills, Mordecai, Boylan Heights, Hayes Barton, Buck Jones Road, North Hills. This city has created by giving developers the right to build or rezone at will. Mayor Baldwin says the missing middle is a national best practice, yet there are no facts to back up that claim or that it does anything other than strip away zoning protections. You have failed to consider the negative impact on single-family neighborhoods and the people who built Raleigh. You say missing middle will promote affordable housing, yet what it actually accomplishes in this market is to create housing that quickly goes to market rate. Missing middle promotes the destruction of housing that was affordable for the people who lived there. The missing middle framework will reduce the quality of life for thousands of Raleigh citizens who own single-family homes, most of whom are not rich. They are school teachers, city, state, county employees, blue-collar workers, retired people who grew up or moved in and invested in this city based on zoning protections that were in place. Missing middle, as Raleigh has instituted it, is an insult on single-family homeowners. When a house is sold, there will be pressure to replace it with multiplex housing, and one by one, you decimate the nature and character of the neighborhood. I and tens of thousands of other Raleigh residents are not ashamed to say we want a single-family home we can afford, with a yard and an arm's length between our neighbors where we are not living on top of each other. Unless Mayor Baldwin and the incumbents running for re-election are defeated, the city plans to gaslight residents by sending out happy talk connectors.
Next, we have Frank Halima.
Frank Halima, 926 Williamson Drive. It has been noted that there is a lack of civility at council in addressing Raleigh's runaway growth. What is the root cause of that lack of civility? Could it start with the name calling by the mayor and Councilor Knight, who refer to their opposition in the pejorative use of activist and radical activist? Could it be fueled by Councilor Knight, who refers to citizens who dissent with giving a city staffer unlimited speaking time during the 1-minute public comments period as rude, entitled folks? What we citizens do feel entitled to is a council that represents the citizens who elected you and not the developers who fund your campaigns. We feel entitled to councilors who study the agenda and know what they are voting for and accept responsibility for their votes. We feel entitled to be informed about matters that affect our lives. Or could it be that a lack of civility is created when the mayor and other councilors don't respond to communication from citizens about a project that is going to drastically affect the character of their neighborhood, the neighborhood where these scouts from White Memorial Presbyterian Church live and meet? And when the mayor instead casually tells the media that it's fine to tear down a historic 100-year-old home and to build 17 tall, skinny townhomes on the site because 17 is better than one. Why not preserve it as a part of our history, as you spoke last council meeting in September about Seaboard Station? Or is the lack of civility due to a lack of engagement regarding and lying about the missing middle zoning changes? Councilman Knight lied in the forum for District E last week when he said he did not vote for Missing Middle 2.0. Your affirmative vote for that text change supporting Missing Middle 2.0 is captured at the 2 hours, 22 minutes, 34 seconds point of the May 10, 2022 council work session. Your
Thank
affirmative
you.
vote is also recorded
Thank
in the
you.
minutes of the meeting.
Thank you. Your time is up.
You can turn my mic off. Have you found the switch since last meeting?
I don't control the mic. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you. Next, we have Chaz. Next, we have,
raise your hands if I should continue 30 more seconds.
next we have Chaz Moore.
I'll continue.
So this is the second time we have a 3 strikes and you're out rule, right?
In failing to state that an apartment building, we have heard nothing more. You have not notified the owner. Because you fear the negative protections. The lack.
Next, we have Chaz Moore. Chaz?
Good evening, City Council, Madam Mayor, Madam City Manager. Who am I? I am Chaz Moore. I'm the refounder of Victor Company. Victor Company is a 501c3 nonprofit organization for firefighters of color, and we do community service here in Raleigh. Who was Victor Company? Victor Company was an all-black, mostly formerly slaves, volunteer fire company that served Southeast Raleigh in 1870. At the 10th North Carolina State Fair, they won a competition. This is 5 years after slavery, and they were called the Victors in the newspaper. They protected Southeast Raleigh from 1869 to 1912. And in 1912, the city of Raleigh decided to create the Raleigh Fire Department, and they confiscated the Victor Company Fire Station, which became Fire Company number 3 or Fire Station 3. So in 2021, during Black History Month, the new Victor Company, we got a plaque, we passed around the hat, and with the help of Chief Danny Poole, we were able to affix a plaque honoring Raleigh's firefighting history to Station 3, which is still there right now. 2022, we again passed around the hat, raised funds, came out of our own pocket, so the city of Raleigh could have a Juneteenth parade. It's the first ever Juneteenth parade ever in our state capital, and we put that on for all residents or people who come and visit Raleigh. So how much has been spent on the Christmas parade or 4th of July or Mayor Unity Day? 88 days ago, Victor Company requested the information. We don't know. I haven't got it back, so I don't know. But we are hoping that we can collaborate with the city in the future to put on a Juneteenth event, 2023, 2024. However long they're gonna have Christmas or 4th of July, that's how long they're gonna have Juneteenth. So we wanna be able to put on an event for our city, for our residents, for people that visit here. Thank you.
Chaz, we have your contact information, and we will have somebody from staff follow up with you.
I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Got that, Michelle? Yeah. Margie Case?
Margie Case could not be here for unanticipated medical reasons. She wanted her prepared statement to be entered into the minutes this evening.
If you
She
could-
also wanted to, it was her full intent to present these hundreds of petitions signed by your constituents to repeal the missing middle and restore Raleigh's zoning.
If you could hand that to the clerk here, please. Thank you. I hope she feels okay. Next is Lisa Huzay. Oh, Lisa?
Good evening. Lisa Hewitt, 712 Hinsdale Street. During your candidate forums, you talked about what you were doing to address the affordable housing crisis. Here's your track record thus far as I see it. Only 156 affordable units were built or preserved last year by the city. You approved 8,500 market rate units downtown, and only 279 are marginally affordable at 80% AMI. You included a height bonus in the TOD areas if a developer adds affordable units, but you still approved nearly all increased height rezonings without any affordable housing. You created the missing middle as a means to increase density in housing types, but it doesn't address affordability. Your error was using the price of a home and not the standard comparison metric of price per square foot. I call this false advertising. You allow thousands of naturally occurring affordable housing to be destroyed every year. There has been no measurable change in decreasing the timeline for people who need help with home repairs so they're not evicted. The city has spent $150 million in 32 years for affordable housing, and you are on track to spend $500 million in 10 years for parks. The priorities. Finally, you justify the building of luxury units because the city needs housing. But at the same time, in the same breath, you say this paves the way for affordable housing because these luxury units will eventually become more affordable as they age. People need affordable housing today. Developers want to invest in Raleigh. We are in the driver's seat. We need to set the expectations. We need you to have a firm hand and negotiate with developers. Set benefits that are proportional to the rezoning or deny the rezoning. Thank you.
Hey, Lisa? Lisa, this might be of interest to you. We're having a work session on housing affordability on October 18th, and you might want to come check in. Okay, thank you. Next
Mayor
is
Baldwin.
Donna Bailey.
I just wanted to say for the record, we'll make these petitions available to the council in the council office.
Thank you.
Donna Bailey, 710 Rosemont. I would like to correct some statements that were made by Mr. Knight at the September 20th work session. Mr. Knight totally twisted the work of the CACs. Knight said the CACs, by continuing to call themselves CACs, was misleading the public. The only action that the City Council took almost 3 years ago was to defund the CACs. Knight said the CACs were self-elected, self-selected, exclusive, and inappropriate. The defunding of the CACs did not stop the mission of the CACs, but it did create a huge vacuum of information for citizens. It is unfortunate that one group of people, Black residents of Raleigh, were especially affected by the defunding of CACs, since only one Black CAC is still active, so there's a huge void in many parts of Raleigh. He said the one vital thing that CACs were doing that was voting on other people's property rights without being elected to do so. The only one misleading the public is Knight. CACs were intentionally designed by the city to be self-elected instead of appointed by the council to be true citizen representative. representation, not some special appointed person. CACs were assigned the responsibility of hearing and voting on rezoning cases by the city. It was a non-binding advisory vote intended to convey the thoughts of the nearby neighborhoods. As to property rights, if a property is under consideration for rezoning, the property owner is seeking additional entitlement. No one is voting on their existing property rights. They are voting to express an opinion and feedback on expanding the property rights of the neighbors. It is disturbing that a city councilor can be so
Next, we
ill-informed
have
about one of
Christina
his
Jones.
main job responsibilities.
Ms. Bailey, I think you know that your time is up. You've been doing this long enough. Thank you. Thank you. 2 minutes. Christina Jones.
$8,005 Finland Drive. I want to clarify some information that continues to be spread from this council about CACs and their role in the Raleigh rezoning process. A developer was required to meet with an individual CAC twice before a vote was taken by membership and passed on to the Planning Commission. Planning Commission would ask how the CAC voted and for any notes regarding the decision. Council held the only official and binding vote affecting anyone's property rights. CACs, as well as planning commissions, were strictly advisory input from the impacted area. It is disturbing that this council chooses to vilify residents instead of holding themselves accountable for their own votes. This is no more evident than in the downtown South vote back in December of 2020. The Planning Commission voted 8-0 to deny the rezoning, and you still voted to go against their advice. Whether or not I agree with your vote is not the point. The fact is, you ultimately make the decisions. Citizens' advisory councils were only ever meant to be advisory, and to claim anything else is misleading and false. It's clear that you wanted to get rid of us in order to fast-track development and push through rezonings at an unprecedented pace. Conversations with residents help make a better project by bringing more voices to the table. Your disdain for our input is not leadership, and it is why you need to be replaced. Thank you.
Next we have Denzel Heroin.
I'm just here as a little treat for everyone. I let the city council know that I want to treat the city of Raleigh. And my name is Denzel Heroin. I'm actually a real-life superhero, and I'm an author. Thank you. Unfortunately, I did go through some issues in 2021. I was targeted by my neighbors, and they put fumes into my home and changed my gender to masculine, which is why I don't look like myself.
Could you speak into the microphone so we can hear you?
Yes, my neighbors, unfortunately, in 27/6/12, pushed fumes through my home, changed my gender to masculine after I offered my book to them. But I've been working through that. The police have not really been able to remove them from their home, but they're working on the matter because I pushed through policy that help make people accountable but rehabilitate them. So I have policy. As you can see, I came with a sign called STOP. Everyone understands this. It's anti-bullying. I made a policy called Stop and No, which helps the community get involved rather than wait for police to take action. So, for example, we hear of mass shooting. We see Uvalde, children dying. The children are afraid. They think adults are not being responsible. So we don't want to wait until police and law enforcement and children are dead. We don't want to wait till law enforcement have to get involved. We want children to be safe, churches to be safe. We want homes to be safe. So I put through policy under Stop and No that I share with White House, the governor's office, to help others understand that they need to respond to Stop and No when people are being bullied. But, for example, in gun control, if we hear of a family that has altercation altercation issues.
Okay, thank
We
you.
want to be able to, okay,
Ja-
we want to be able to know.
Jamsel, your time
you
is
so
up.
much.
And can we have somebody follow up? Okay, thank you. Tim Niles?
Somebody's phone is here. Tim Niles, 11509 Midlavian Drive. At a candidate forum last week, David Knight falsely accused Livable Raleigh of being a super PAC, political action committee. We're not. We're a registered 501c4 nonprofit organization. PACs are organizations like North Carolina Property Rights Fund and Triangle Government Alliance, who together supported Knight's 2019 campaign with spending of nearly $70,000 during an election where Knight got over 70% of his campaign financing from the development industry. It's sad when a politician resorts to making false attacks on community organizations like CACs and Livable Raleigh, as Knight has done repeatedly. It's even worse when the attacks are made at an event hosted by another organization who, because of their own nonprofit status, couldn't legally hold Knight accountable for his lies. Knight may not be able to be held accountable for false claims against a political opponent, but that lack of accountability does not apply when he falsely accuses Livable Raleigh in public on a recorded broadcast. Such statements are libelous, and we demand that he cease and desist immediately. This is the third time I've had to come before this council to explain legal concepts to Knight, who is supposed to be a trained lawyer. First it was freedom of speech, then all are created equal. Now I have to explain libel. Both Knight and Marianne Baldwin need to stop the baseless accusations that Livable Raleigh is a super PAC. We're not, although we are super. If you feel a need to respond with anything other than a public apology, let me remind you of 2 points from your council code of conduct. 1, be welcoming to speakers no matter their point of view. And 2, avoid debate and argument with the public. It's never appropriate to challenge a speaker. Thank you.
Next, we have Kristen Havlet.
Kristen Havlick, 11230 Avocet Lane. $124 million. That's how much the city council and the city manager decided to allocate to white supremacy in our city for our $1 billion annual budget. In the last week, my councilman from District E stated that police brutality has never happened in Raleigh. I don't know what universe you are living in, councilman, but you and the rest of this council have clearly never listened to anyone in front of this podium. I see you shaking your fucking head at me. Go off.
Excuse
Whatever.
me.
Now, as a white person that doesn't have to fear for my life because of the color of my skin, I have actually listened to my neighbors and learned that police do not keep us safe. They do not prevent crime, and they do not protect and serve anyone. Even the Police Oversight Board, which has no power and cannot even speak to any officers, could tell you that. So let me correct you, Councilor Knight. There has been plenty of police brutality, and I'm just going to list a few names of the officers that have been murdered by Raleigh police officers. Akiel Dinkins, Jaquan Terry, Sohail Moharred, Keith Collins, David Atkinson, Ruel Rodriguez Nunez, and Daniel Tercios. All of these men were black and brown, and some of the officers that killed them are still employed by the Raleigh Police Department. Police brutality exists because you allow it to by funding it. Police do not keep us safe, and it's time for us to start funding programs that do.
Next, we have Shane Collins.
Hello, Council. Shane Collins. I live 1205 Country Ridge near North Hills. I had such success with my last talk involving music that I thought I'd bring in the police this time with Every Breath You Take, because our police needs support, and our fire department needs support and pay. So I'm here to talk about the growth, unbridled growth that's displacing people in Raleigh. Every breath you take, every move you make, every step you take to evade the public opinions will be watching you. Every single day, every word you say, every game you play to deny police and fire their pay. Calling it progress, but really just packing people for density. We'll be watching you. Every move you make, every vow you break, every smile you fake, every claim you stake, every new tower you approve while tearing down historical homes, apartments, and buildings, we'll be watching you. Let's make Raleigh more livable. Vote and see livableraleigh.com, because it is not a super PAC and it is a nonprofit with very little money. Thank you.
Next, we have Joshua Bradley.
It is me, right? Joshua Bradley, 1324 Spring Lawn Court. The city needs to change its focus in regards to affordable housing. Instead of focusing on housing affordable for people who make 80% of the AMI or above, the city should be focused on low-cost housing, where the shortage is, where the main majority of the shortage is and the needs are the greatest. In fact, please stop referring to affordable housing if you mean people that make 80% of the AMI or above. Any housing is affordable if you're wealthy enough, so it really means little if the upwardly mobile middle class can afford expensive housing. The growth in the city should prioritize the people who enable the city to function and the people the city has already pushed out onto the street. Workers in the city are the foundation upon which our city is built. If we push out the workers, we erode and damage the foundation. We will not be able to maintain what makes the city great. It's like a puzzle. You need to work on the bigger picture, but you got to start with the edge pieces. Nobody starts a puzzle from the middle. The workers are those edge pieces. A couple of unrelated things, since I've got 45 seconds left. If folks are running for office, they should be able to say so here. And apparently there was some problems given to Christina about saying that she's running, that it's a public meeting. I don't know why anybody would fear bringing it up. Hopefully she'll be the next District E counselor. I'm running at large. And then the last thing, please, 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 for the love of God, don't rezone anything that will reduce protections to our watershed if it ever comes up. And in fact, make sure that the people know when they come into a rezoning, know that it's just not going to happen. Thank you.
Next, we have Del Monte Crawford.
Good evening, Council. Good evening, Jonathan Melton. Good evening, Madam Mayor Baldwin. I want to thank everyone for this time and the minutes. I am DeMonte Crawford. I reside at 6520 Golden Lantern Court, just outside of Lake Lantrell. I am running as Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina. Raleigh's issues are my issues. I have followed you, Madam Mayor Baldwin, on this mayoral forum. You opposed reinstating CACs. You have agreed that the $275 million park bond will work for the Black community. It does not. The Lakeland Park has new townhomes called Park at Leesville. You're building and renovating the park for them. You're not renovating the park for the renters in that place. See right here, Madam Mayor Baldwin, $275 million bonds that don't work. Many have called you criminal. What I call you is a has-been. This is the time now that you will be unseated as a mayor. You have taken donations from an anti-LGBT person, and you have a gay person that's sitting on your council, I too happen to identify as the LGBT community. I vote no for the Raleigh Park bonds, and if you are here today, you should vote no as well. A vote no for the park bonds is a vote yes for the present. It is a vote yes for the future of Black Americans and also the future of brown citizens in our state. You will not suppress Black history. We will continue to push our history. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Andrea Fennell.
Straight. Hi, 2252 Boston Place. I'm here again. I do not like the gentrification that has been done in Raleigh. I have grown up in Raleigh. I moved out of Raleigh for a little bit. And when I came back, it's crazy. I have to have a GPS, Marianne, to drive around the city I grew up in. That's crazy, isn't it? I didn't even know where the hell I was. That's crazy to me. Not only that, you stated you are working with the feds to identify, you stated that you are working with the feds to identify in crime areas and who is likely to commit a crime. Don't have my glasses on, sorry, y'all. We need to encourage, not lock up people. Marianne, are you paying attention? Okay, I'm talking to you. All right. So I'm tired of the gentrification that was done. My grandmother's house is on 1007 South Person Street. You dangle money in front of people who have never had money, and they're going to go for that. So I no longer have my grandmother's house is on Person Street. It's a historical house. It was given to someone, and they bought it and sold it for $550,000 after dangling $150 in my cousin's face. He didn't have that money, so he took it. Now we don't have that priceless house my grandfather and his father built. So I'm tired of gentrification. We will be marching in this city. It's tired and it's done. You're going to pay attention to people in Raleigh. The natives are coming back. You made them leave. They're coming back. We had rooming houses. Where are the people? Where did they go? Marianne, where are they at? I want to know. I'm talking to you. Where are they? And we got an iconic picture going around you and I. You seen it? I know you have. The picture of me talking to you. It's iconic. Y'all should see it. It's very cute. I'm looking at her like she's crazy, because she absolutely is, if you think we're going to vote for that bond, because we're not. Vote no.
Thank you.
And vote no to you. Bye.
Thank you. Next, we have Octavia Rainey.
Good evening. My name is Octavia Rainey, and I live at 1516 East Plain Street. I'm here to talk about the taxes. We can't pay our taxes. Our taxes are extremely high. They are high. And we don't have the opportunity to create wealth. You must remember, if you go back in history, that at the end of the Civil War, Black people were forced to live in floodplain areas that had tremendous environmental injustice. That's why Black folk live. Even as a child, I grew up on Carver Street, and I can remember when I was 9 and 10 years old, Carver Street used to flood. Idlewild used to flood. So when you look at it, we paid unfair taxes. When the Senate passed SB 25, July 2015, we saw the emergency of all kinds of buildings in Southeast Raleigh. And according to Richard Moore, Tim Moore from the General Assembly, what that bill states, SB 25, it states that you can build houses of any sizes, except for if you're in a historical neighborhood or an NCOD, which left our neighborhoods unprotected. So from 2015 to present, you ought to see all the modern houses in my neighborhood, all the modern houses surrounded by Southeast Raleigh. And what I'm saying is that there has not been a conversation at that table at all about this, not even from Quarry Branch. It is terrible. It's time for a change. And this city council have to offer us tax relief. I'm suggesting that you have $275 million sitting aside to build a city hall. Why not take some of that money and help us with our taxes? We work.
Thank you,
And we
Octavia.
deserve that.
And I think last time you were here, our city manager told you we are working with the county on a plan for tax rebates. Thank you. Douglas Johnston?
I'm Douglas Johnston, 120 Forest Road. Wow, I didn't know whether I'd come to a celebration of the First Amendment or the old-time forum for invective, and I almost want to leave it at that. But I did want to say that we should back the bonds. We should really back the bonds because they're a down payment. There's lots more need. And there's lots more to make the city what it, as Stephen Bentley said, and I wish I'd said it first, we've got green spaces, greenways, and green parks in our DNA. And it's a good opportunity to get the money we need to get started on it. It's a down payment, but it's an opportunity to improve things. The other thing I was going to talk about was this little part of the greenway. You see the greenway on the left, and that's a recently developed property that offers opportunity to make it part of the greenway in a beautiful way. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you, Doug. Ashley Perot?
(400 West Hargett Street). I really enjoyed attending the candidate forums that were held recently. Whether we were aligned or not, I appreciated getting a glimpse into the thought process behind some of your decisions and what you've done during your term. I want to speak about the lack of other opportunities for us to hear from you and the need for more transparency. These meetings are not structured in a way that gives us transparency and commentary behind your decisions. I acknowledge there are time constraints, but without two-way communication, you cannot call public comments an opportunity for engagement. A lot of people come to city council meetings when there's an item on the agenda that they feel passionate about or impacts them directly. More times than not, they leave feeling frustrated, confused, and unheard, even if they did have the opportunity to speak. They leave feeling that way because for the most part, your conversations are happening elsewhere. Very little is usually said here before a vote. We need and deserve more of those comments from you, just as much as we need and deserve for you to hear ours. I spent time on the city's website and I found the council's strategic plan, but the last update was 2021. I found your bios, but not your voting history. If it's available, it's not easy to find. My challenge to you is, how can you better utilize the platforms you have to provide updates on what you are doing and education behind your decisions outside of campaigning? Many of you have spoken about the challenges of governing during unprecedented times. We have heard a lot of criticism tonight on how you've led. I rely on resources such as Livable Raleigh to help explain to me why you are doing what you are doing, because you're not. Thank you.
Thank you. Haley Kinsler? Haley's not here? Okay. Dolores Jones?
Dolores Jones, 9732 Dansington Court. Madam Mayor, City Council members, and staff, again, I'm Dolores Jones. My husband's with me, Reverend Hansel Jones. We live in Northeast Raleigh, and we don't get to utilize our yard at all. And I'm here to speak on behalf of the residents of the Windsor Forest subdivision. Tonight I come to petition the council for the residents of Windsor Forest subdivision to pay 447 yards of Camp Durant Road from Durant Road to Cliff Haven Drive. The back of our homes face North Durant Camp Road, a city-owned road that is gravel and dirt. My husband and I purchased our home in 2000, 22 years ago. The traffic on this road was seldom traveled. Since the city approved the building permits for Open Door Baptist Church and the addition of Abbott Creek Elementary, since these new developments, Camp Durant has become a very busy, frequently used road by many trucks, cars, delivery trucks, etc. The amount of dust and debris makes it impossible for residents to use their backyards or even sit on the porch. Something must be done to remedy this problem as soon as possible. When my husband wrote to the council 8 years ago, the city began grading the road. The problem has increased with more dirt, more dust, and more debris. We have noticed a problem with tons of cars speeding on the road. I thank you for your time, and I hope that you guys would give some attention to this matter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. City Manager, could we follow up on that? Okay, thank you. We'll be following up on that. Thank you, Dolores. Andrew Mike.
Mayor Baldwin, members of the council, good evening. I wanted to address some of the comments that were made here. First off, I think we do need density, and I think we do need more housing in the area. We're facing a housing crisis. I don't think NIMBYism is the answer to that. However, I think that we need housing for regular working people and not just, very rich people that can afford it. And my rent's gone up $300 a month in the last 5 years, and I'm told I'm one of the lucky ones. So yeah, I don't think your current course is something that is sustainable for regular residents. And it's pricing them out that's going to lead this place to turn into a place like Minneapolis or Portland. Now, the second part of it is, I think we do need density. I think we do need transit-oriented development. But I don't think all the transit-oriented development in the world will help if the transit service in this city isn't improved, and dramatically so. Right now, we are facing a public transit crisis. Right now, we are at 1 hour frequency for just about every bus route in this city, almost. Before that, it was bad enough, 30 minutes until the end of the working day, and then 1 hour afterwards, ending at 10 o'clock. Now it's practically unusable, especially since you have to connect to downtown. This makes daily trips an all-day affair, and that's unsustainable, and it's unacceptable, or at least it should be to the majority of people here. On top of that, the system is unreliable. I have been stranded at the Moore Square bus stop on the Go Raleigh bus at 6 o'clock in the evening, right after work, when I needed to get a bus home. This has happened last week. It happened before the pandemic. It's happened since 2018. Nothing has been done about it. When I ask a supervisor where the bus is, they say, I don't know. There's a lot that needs to change. And I hope you take this time to reflect and see where we need to, increase and improve our transit services. Otherwise, you can build all the fancy bus shelters you want, and it's not going to make an iota worth of difference.
Thank you. Next, we have Natalie Jones.
Yes, Natalie Jones of Raleigh. I'm here again to speak about the problem that's on Newbern Avenue, Tower Shopping Center. I was out there a couple of weeks ago, Mayor, and I noticed that it was a concert going on at the Tower Shopping Center. A rapper was performing, and I called to find out where did they get their permit from. I was instructed that a private contractor had purchased the property. And my question to you is, since the city has so much money, why don't the city buy some of this property
and utilize it for the homeless people that's on Newbern Avenue, and put some of those drug addicts into a facility to rehabilitate them, the homeless people, into some of those facilities to give them a place to get out the street. The city used to have a program called the CEDAR, the WIN program. We got a lot of young people that needs rehabilitation from drugs. We got a lot of homeless people that need to be in a homeless shelter. We got a lot of people that need to go to school, that need to get an education to get out the streets. The rent is so high that these homeless people cannot afford homes. They cannot afford to make it on these streets. You all are spending money on zoning areas and raising the rent that people cannot afford to make it out there. So instead of spending money on these parks, spending money on raising rent, why not help these homeless people, the drug addicts that cannot afford to go into rehabilitation, that don't have Medicaid, Medicare that can help them? Take this money and help those people.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Next, we have Jim Gruskin.
Thanks for the time. I want to begin by thanking David Knight for taking the time to meet with me a few weeks ago. And I spoke last month about the fact that some elements of the missing middle framework that this council has adopted are commendable and worthy of our support. The unintended consequences, though, can be destructive to our neighborhoods and can dilute much of what makes Raleigh a unique and desirable place to live and work. I'm a concerned citizen who has never been active in local politics until now, but as someone who's new to the process, I am puzzled by a few things. The deferral of meetings with people in the districts on the matter seems odd. Although I believe it was offered, I don't think there's been a meeting with Patrick Young, the Planning and Development Director, on this in recent past. And then a question I got, how can they do this, is a question I heard from someone many of you know. This person was asking how such a dramatic shift to our neighborhoods could be approved without sufficient public debate when there are other viable options that can achieve some of the same objectives. There has certainly been much talk about missing middle, but another middle seems missing in this process, and that's the middle ground that can only be reached through civil and authentic discourse with those who are both willing to listen and empowered to act. I think what you're hearing is a growing movement of people who have been frustrated to the point of speaking out. These are not activists or radicals, but your concerned neighbors who care deeply about our communities. And by that I mean all communities of Raleigh, North, Southeast, Hayes Barton, you name it. The people pleading to save our neighborhoods are some of Raleigh's most influential thought leaders. We're stronger together, so let's work together.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Malcolm Carroll.
Thank you for letting me come back and speak with you again. I was here 2 weeks ago. I've got some gripes, and that's enough to go around. I've heard a lot of them, and we'd be here all night if you heard all of them. A couple things that really annoy me is changing the voting system. Normally, when a body changes a voting system, it applies to the next round of people, not the people that's doing the changing. The way it is now, you don't have to have a majority. All you have to do is get a couple of empty seats to run against you, and you could win with 25%. The other thing you've done it just gives incumbents an unfair advantage. The other thing is that, changing the election year. You gave yourself an extra year to pay back the developers that funded you. And another year to destroy neighborhoods, tear down trees. I just saw David Knight's poster the other day. It had trees across the top. I was thinking, how ironic. How ironic as much as he's done to destroy trees. And there's a lot of talk about affordable housing. The most affordable housing inside the Beltline was on the corner of Oberlin and Fairview. There's more than 100 affordable apartments, and it had the most gorgeous oak trees in town. It should have been a historic designation, but instead, you allowed it to be leveled. It was leveled, and it ain't going to be any affordable housing there, just like the Josephus Daniels house. That was a big plot of land you could have put affordable housing. But no, we didn't do that. And as I stated a couple of weeks ago,
Thank you.
the mayor
Your
and
time's
David
up.
Knight and a couple of other council members
Your
got
time
most of their
is up.
funding
Thank you.
from developers.
Could we please?
And there was a no-bid contract just awarded to Wolfram Beatty and Hope. Guess who used to work for Hope? Guess who was the vice president of Hope? Our mayor.
Councilmember Branch.
So if we could have Stephen Bentley from PRCR to come to the mic to address that question for Councilmember Branch.
The council approved a sole source contract. It was not a bid award to Holt. It actually is removing that portion from the CMAR contract for Balfour Beatty and Holt joint venture. The city will actually procure playground equipment, pumps, and irrigation equipment separately, so that will be pulled out of the Holt Brothers contract. It was not a no-bid contract awarded to Holt.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Bentley.
Okay. All right, stepping out. We'll start with public hearings now before the council. Our first is street closing STC 03-2022. This is a portion of South Bloodworth Street. No one has signed up in opposition. We have one person in support.
Okay. Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. This street closure, as you said, is a portion of right-of-way along South Bloodworth Street, just north of MLK Boulevard. It is located within the East Raleigh South Park National Register Historic District, and the Raleigh Historic Development Commission reviewed the case and recommended approval. The applicant for the case has stated that they're seeking to relocate the historic Ligon House to the property. There's not currently an active site plan, and staff has reviewed the case and recommends multiple easements for infrastructure in the right-of-way and found that the closure to be with those easements consistent with the comprehensive plan. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Do we have any questions? Councilmember Branch?
No questions. I'm just glad that we found a solution for the Ligon House so that we can actually save it. So I definitely want to thank the applicant for that, and this is something I will support at the closing of the hearing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I have one person signed up to speak in support. I'm going to open the hearing. Is Ashkin Hosseini here? Okay. I don't see that. Oh, excuse me. Where? Oh, here he comes. Excuse me. Allergy season.
Good evening. I was just here to answer any questions, so I didn't have anything to say.
Okay. We don't have any questions, so I'm going to close the hearing. Councilmember Branch?
Move for approval.
Seconded by Councilmember Fort. All in favor? Aye. Okay, that was unanimous, clerk. Next, we have street closing STC 04-2022, Flint Wright Place right-of-way.
This closure is for a portion of Flint Place adjacent to Cox Avenue, south of Hillsborough Street. There was a previous closure for the portion just east of the red area you see on this map between this closure and Park Avenue that was previously approved with the retention of a public access easement. The petitioner in this case is seeking to add a youth building to the Alexander YMCA, and there is a site plan under review for that development and seeking to improve safety and operations in the area by closing the street. And easements are recommended upon closure, including an easement for bicycle and pedestrian access to connect to the access that was retained to the east so that we maintain good connectivity between Cox Avenue and Park Avenue. So with those easements in place, staff found this to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions? Okay, Michael Birch has signed up to speak in support. No one has signed up in opposition. I'm going to open the hearing.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. Michael Birch, just again wanted to speak in support of the application, but did want to make one note just clear for the record. I think your draft resolution references the city retaining a public access easement. We just want it to be clear that it's for pedestrian and bicycle access only, not vehicular, since that's the point of the closure. So with that, we would ask for your approval. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any questions of Michael? All right, I'm going to close the hearing. Councilmember Fort?
Be my motion to approve.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay, clerk, that was unanimous.
Just real quick, approve with Michael's modification, correct? Yes, no vehicles.
Okay, next is street closing STCO 6 2022, portion of Peach Road. No one has signed up in support and no one has signed up in opposition.
Thank you. This is a city-initiated closure of a portion of right-of-way along Peach Road that overlaps Peach Road Park. This is a situation where the existing right-of-way actually overlaps the neighborhood center in the park, and staff is seeking to clean that up. There's no intended future transportation use for this right-of-way, and the neighborhood center is due for renovations. So there are staff on hand if you have any questions about the plans there. We did recommend also authorizing a Duke Energy easement as part of your action, since there's a need to retain an easement for some existing infrastructure in the right-of-way. And we found it to be consistent with the plan, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions? Okay, no one has signed up in support or opposition. I am going to open the hearing and close the hearing. Councilmember Fort?
Be my motion to approve.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay, that was unanimous, clerk, thank you. Next is rezoning Z12221, Chester Road.
Yes, ma'am, this is a request to rezone just under 2 acres from R6 with an NCOD to R6 with conditions. It is consistent with the comprehensive plan, and the Planning Commission recommends approval. I would say before I get too much deeper into this, the applicant has submitted revised conditions for staff comment. They are not executed appropriately for your action this evening. I expect the applicant will ask that you continue the public hearing to the 18th so that they can make those revisions. So just wanted to prepare you with that going in. So this is on the west side of Chester Road, just north of Wade Avenue. It's a handful of lots and a couple of views from the street here. So there are a couple of conditions here already. They've provided for a wall or fence on the western boundary. They have prohibited the apartment building type in such a way that units cannot be separated from one another by a horizontal party wall, so they can't have stacked or flat type units, which effectively means they can only build detached house, attached house, or a townhouse. And then civic building and open lot are allowed in the district by right. And then they've made some provisions for buildings that are more than 2 stories in terms of wall plane, setback, in relationship to Chester Road. So the change here is a increase in residential entitlement. The setbacks are not really changing. This is consistent with the plan overall, and the Planning Commission does recommend approval. What questions could I answer for you before you open the public hearing? I think you have folks signed up in opposition, and I know the applicant is here.
Okay, any questions for Bynum? All right, I'm going to open the hearing. Speaking for the applicant, Matt Paul.
Good evening, Mac Paul here on behalf of the owners of these 3 lots. I think in the simplest way to state it, the rezoning is about giving permission to build 3 stories rather than the current 2-story limit in exchange for prohibiting the apartment building type. As some of you know, there was a lot of commentary and concern about this at the outset. It's been many months of discussions. I will say and very much appreciate the organization of the community and the neighbors who were involved in that conversation. It was a very, specific conversation with very constructive suggestions, most of which centered on the apartment building type being prohibited. So we agreed to that. The reason for Bynum Walter's comment about this one additional modification at Planning Commission, there was a realization or a concern about the way that one of the side yard setbacks was provided in the condition next to some existing townhomes. And we were asked to clarify that if there's a 3-story building there, it has to be 25 feet back. So that realization didn't occur until right before the Planning Commission. We agreed to it, but it wasn't until last week that all the neighbors got together and reviewed the language and signed off on the language about the 25-foot setback. So my understanding, based on and I think I sent you all an email that relayed this comment from the community. So we just need to make that one change so we can come back. I would ask Bynum, do we need to close the hearing in order to add that change or not? Okay, so if that's the one change we'd like to make. Happy to answer any questions you might have. If there have been any new questions or comments that have come up.
Any questions? Okay. I will hold it 6 minutes, 17 seconds. Speaking in opposition, Vivian Zeldis. Is Vivian Zeldis here? Okay. I am going to assume then she is not present. I am then going to close the hearing. Do we have a motion?
They need.
We're going to hold it open?
Hold it open.
Oh, that's right. So you can file those conditions, bring it back for our very busy meeting on the 18th. It's going to be a long one. Okay, thank you. So we're holding that open then?
Sure.
We're holding that open
She's telling Gail.
for the conditions, clerk. Yeah. And we'll be back before us on the 18th. Okay, that's right. Next is rezoning Z122, Rock Quarry Road and Wallstore Road.
Yes, ma'am. We heard this public hearing at our last meeting, and it was continued to this evening. We had some folks signed up to speak on this item, and they had questions about the nature of the rezoning and the comprehensive plan amendment. Staff has reached out to that citizen repeatedly, and while we were not able to connect with the citizen, I know that the applicant was able to, and their concerns seem to be resolved. And so I think this is ready for your action.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, I was going to say, I as well was able to reach the applicant plus the citizen, and they did communicate, and the matter was resolved and ready to move forward at the appropriate time.
Okay. We have 4 people signed up in support. No one has signed up in opposition. I'm going to open the hearing. Worth Mills is here for the applicant. Would you?
Thank you, Mayor. Worth Mills. Happy to answer any questions that council may have, but again, we did speak with Ms. Talley, gave her more information about the rezoning, and she was supportive and wished us luck tonight.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. I am going then to close the hearing Councilmember Branch.
I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated October 4th, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda items under recommended action. This approval is also deemed an amendment to the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. Next is CP 622 Camelot Village. This was also held open from our September 20th meeting.
Yes, ma'am. These two items were related, and so if you're ready to act, this is ready for you.
Okay. I am going to open the hearing. Well, first off, any questions? Okay. I'm going to open the hearing, close the hearing. Councilmember Branch.
I move for approval.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. Okay. Thank you very much. Next, we have rezoning Z122 Dawson and Martin.
Yes, ma'am. This is also an old item, so since you saw this last, there has been a removal of the 217 West Martin Street parcel, which is the location of the building where the Berkeley Cafe is located. And then the applicant has also removed the zoning condition related to building preservation, as that is the only building of relevance previously included in the case. The parcel that remains has no structure on it. So they have revised their petition to remove the Berkeley Cafe building parcel and remove the relevant condition. So that's all that's the update for tonight.
Okay. So we need to hold this open, or
they've revised the petition. It's ready for your action if you are ready.
Okay. I am going to then close the hearing. Do we?
I don't want to, and I'm not sure there's any time left, but I was also curious if there was an update on the lease extension discussion with the Berkeley Cafe, because removing the historic structure from the rezoning, I think, was one piece, and we wanted to see if something could be worked out to keep them there for the time being.
Thank you. Molly Stewart, Morningstar Law Group. That was certainly a message that we heard loud and clear in our last meeting. And since that time, I'm happy to report that the landlord and tenant have signed a term sheet for an extension of that lease for 1 year.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Do we have a motion?
Yeah. All right. So be my motion to approve. I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement. I'm sorry, did you close the hearing? Yes, or motion?
Yes, I closed it.
Yes, I thought. Okay. I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated October 4th, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action.
All in favor? Aye. I just want to say good work. Thank you. You listened and appreciate what you came back with, especially with the extension of the lease. Thank you. Okay, next is rezoning Z1522 Washington Street.
That's right. This is a request to rezone an acre and a half from R10 and NX3. It's a mixed use or a split zoned parcel currently to NX3 across the entirety of the parcel with conditions. This is consistent with the comprehensive plan, but inconsistent with the future land use map and the urban form map. And Planning Commission did recommend denial here, 5-3, largely because a number of the conditions offered by the applicant, city staff believes are not easily enforceable by staff. So this is on the west side of the railroad, east of Glenwood Avenue, north of, well, on the south side of Washington Street here. So we're east of Fletcher Park. A couple of views of the site. So the building is up on the high side of the site, and the site falls down away from Washington Street. So what and I've highlighted here in green the conditions that staff had concerns about. They've limited principal uses, and then limited additional uses to the existing building footprint. And then they have made some provisions about food trucks, that they only be held in hosted in conjunction with other events. They've limited the number of events at the facility throughout the year, provided some specifications about event hours, offered other limits about indoor events throughout the year, and also limited attendance, made some provisions about pole-mounted lighting. So the net effect here, there's really not a significant change in the entitlement here, but they're clarifying, simplifying the zoning across the site, right? Because they've been operating this commercial use on the split zone parcel. They're trying to simplify the situation there. So they have not offered a frontage here, which would be, would make them consistent with the urban form map. I think given the disposition of the site on Washington Street, technically inconsistent, but not functionally probably a large concern. And then the future land use map here, because they're inconsistent, this would amend the map. So in addition to approving the zoning, you'd be approving a future land use map. So this is consistent with the comprehensive plan, although it is inconsistent with future land use map and the urban form map. The Planning Commission did not recommend approval because some of those conditions were unenforceable. I understand from my colleagues that the applicant has may be interested in making some amendments, and I expect you will want to hear about that from the applicant during their remarks.
Okay,
Any questions I can answer
any questions
before?
for Bynum?
Just for clarity, so the denial is because they believe there are some conditions that were not enforceable.
That's right.
Okay.
At the time, that was what staff had said. I believe that there has been clarity and some further conditions that will be offered. Mm-hmm.
That was their concern, right? That the conditions as offered at their time of review could not be well enforced by staff. Yep.
Okay, I'm going to open the hearing. We have 4 people here to speak in favor, and no one has signed up in opposition. Matt Paul is here for the applicant.
Yeah, good evening, Mac Paul here on behalf of Katrina Godwin. He's and Seas is the owner of 501 Washington Street. I have a presentation that's coming up right now. Just to help kind of orient you, this is like a very difficult situation, interesting situation. It's not unique to Raleigh, but you may remember back when we mapped the city with the UDO, the idea and the principle behind that was to do entitlement equal to equal. So whatever the existing entitlement was supposed to be carried forward and not give someone more entitlement or take away entitlement. This shows a building that Ms. Godwin owns. It was built about 50 years ago. It was a medical supply company was in there. There was a school in there at one time. There was a sound studio in there at one time. But it's also in the historic Brooklyn Glenwood neighborhood with lots of single-family homes right there as well in close proximity. You can see at some point in the old zoning map, it was zoned commercial, neighborhood business, where the commercial building is. What we don't know is why the building 50 years ago was developed as a commercial building, but the map wasn't drawn correctly. So what happened is, the zoning map line, you can see it, the commercial zone cut off the corner of her building or part of her building, and that creates a problem in Raleigh. We don't split zone buildings, particularly you don't have a commercial building that is only partially zoned commercial. So this mistake occurred. We don't know exactly how it was made, but as a result, when Ms. Godwin went to add she wanted to build a residential unit on the building so she could live there, and learned that this happened. And so it's led to a multi-year effort with the city to try to correct it. And ultimately, the best solution was to rezone it so that it complies with, the building complies with the zoning. And so we could have just moved the zoning line, 20 feet and fixed it. But we also knew Ms. Godwin bought it about 20 years ago. She has operated a dance studio, and she also has event space in there. As you can see, it's a beautiful space, nice garden. This is downstairs where her dance studio is. And she also has like corporate events and other events in there in the evenings. And so what it led to is almost a year-long conversation. So it also was an opportunity for her to talk to the community. We had a very organized group of core leaders in the neighborhood who sat down in a very constructive dialogue to try to make sure her operations, and it also brought to light comments she had not heard before about some of the evening hours and cars coming and going. And so it was also pointed out that the Height House development in Boylan Heights was a nice recent example of how these uses can coexist in a historic neighborhood. Some of the uses in the Height House deal with hours of operation, numbers of events per year, and numbers of people. So as you can understand, folks gravitated to that as a good model. And so that led to some of the conditions that staff has identified as problematic, challenging to enforce. But after a year of negotiating, we certainly didn't feel like we could unilaterally just remove those from our zoning case. And ultimately, they're permissible. They're up to council to decide. We acknowledge there's some difficulties in enforcement. But we do appreciate recently staff has come and suggested at least one very constructive condition that would require the owner to maintain a log of all of the events that could be inspected by the city at any time. And so any event, numbers of people, hours, all of that information, which he has been keeping anyway internally, but that was the suggestion to provide a vehicle or a means to enforce it. So with that, I want to have time for the folks we've been working with to speak as well.
Good evening. Roy Attride from 501 Cleveland Street. I want to echo what Max said. We spent a long time working on this project. It's surrounded by single-family homes. A lot of young families live in the area, and so having an event space was problematic for the neighborhood. And so we did take cues from other zoning cases with conditions that would allow us to have Miss Godwin have a well-functioning business, but within a neighborhood environment. We went many rounds to get to the point at which we had something that was acceptable. I will say that having an event space in a neighborhood, really those things don't go well together, but we did come up with something that was acceptable. The conditions are there was a lot of compromises in these conditions, both made by the owner, but also made by the neighborhood to make this happen. The number of events, the hours of operation, trying to restrict traffic. The number of people who are allowed at events was purposefully to allow her to use her on-site parking, so it didn't creep into the neighborhood. So we were really constructive and I think creative in the way we came up with these solutions. And so it's really important to us that they stay intact because it really does represent the culminative work of all of us for last year.
Thank you. Does Brandy Thompson?
So thank you again for letting us come before you. I will echo what both Mac and Roy have said, that we just would strongly desire, we ask you to allow the conditions to remain intact. There are concerns with parking, noise, events, all the things that come with an event center. So I think just the conditions that have emerged from the collaboration, we feel like can help us have a livable condition. So thank you.
Thank you. So what you're asking for at this point is to hold this, or where are we with the, I know Travis has been working on this.
Yes,
So
we've submitted that condition that was suggested, and the staff's reviewing it right now. We'd anticipate that we would be able to submit that prior to your next meeting, so we would ask you hold it to allow us to do that and get feedback from Travis.
Okay, do we have any questions? Councilmember Melton?
I have one, and it may have just been how it was transcribed into our agenda, but I'm confused about this condition. It says limit weeknight indoor events that end by 11 p.m. to 30 per year and 1 per week. Require all weeknight indoor events to end by 10 p.m. So is that a typo, or?
We went around on the language of that. The intent, and I think we got comfortable with the way the wording ended up, that she's allowed to have 30 events up to 11 p.m. and then any number could end at 10. So that is the intent. I think it.
As long as y'all understand it, I'm
Yeah,
fine.
I mean,
just
somehow we
wanted to make
understood
sure
it. It
wasn't
didn't sound like that when you read it.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to hold this open to allow you to submit conditions, and clerk will reschedule this for our meeting on the 18th. Okay, thank you. I want to thank all of you for working together. I know this has been going on for more than a year. I first met with Katrina when, maybe 3 years ago on this matter, so I'm glad to see us moving forward. Glad to see the neighbors, all of you working together. Thank you so much. Okay, next is rezoning Z122, Boylan and Hillsborough.
This is the northwest corner of Boylan Avenue and Hillsborough Street. It's a request to rezone just under an acre from OX7 with an urban limited frontage and OX3 with a DE frontage with an NCOD, to both parcels being OX20 urban limited with conditions. The request is consistent with the comprehensive plan but inconsistent with future land use map, and Planning Commission does recommend approval. So there's an office two-story office building on this site now. So a couple of views of the site here. An amazing display of Bradford pear that blocks the building. A couple of conditions here. They have prohibited some of the, just a couple of uses here. They've provided some specification about the screening standards of TC 221 being applicable here, and they have provided for a public art installation on the site. So the entitlement here is increasing significantly because of the increase in height. Retail, just given the size of the lot, and typical retail being only on ground floor, retail square footage not changing here significantly. It is inconsistent with the future land use map because of the building height requests that they are making. So the office residential mixed use designation on future land use map does not anticipate this kind of height, but it is consistent with the plan overall. So that future land use map zoning consistency, and then also the downtown transition area. This is on the west side of the downtown transition area. Nonetheless, Planning Commission recommends approval. What questions could I answer for you before you hear from the applicant?
Any questions? Okay, I'm going to open the hearing. No one has signed up in opposition. Worth Mills is here to speak on behalf of the applicant.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Worth Mills, 4509 Creedmoor Road, Suite 302, Raleigh. On behalf of the rezoning applicant, this is a rezoning to continue the significant redevelopment pattern that we're seeing along the western downtown area. The rezoning would increase the allowable building height to 20 stories while retaining that office mixed-use based zoning district. The UL frontage would bring the building closer to the intersection of Hillsborough and Boylan, consistent with the Block 83 development and other forthcoming developments along Hillsborough Street as well. And this would increase potential office, retail, and residential space within walking distance to the center of downtown and Raleigh Union Station. So the existing building on 706 Hillsborough Street was built in 1961. This is not a modern or urban style of development with parking between the building and North Boylan Avenue. We have the Char Grill across North Boylan Avenue and that future rezoning to our east. Block 83, that recent development, is to our south across Hillsborough Street, and Hilliard Memorial Church is the adjacent property to our west. This photo, you can see the existing layout. Again, this is a development pattern from a bygone era where you have that surface parking between the building and the street. What we want to do is bring a more modern approach to this development, bringing that building closer to the intersection, having a parking deck as opposed to surface parking. And again, you can see from Boylan Avenue another view along with the 105 North Boylan parcel, which is currently used solely for surface parking. Currently, the property is split zoned between OX7 Urban Limited and OX3 Detached. There is 12-story zoning to the property northwest. The assemblage across North Boylan is currently requesting 20 stories as well. This portion of Hillsborough Street is undergoing significant redevelopment and increasing building heights, and this rezoning request is compatible with the existing and proposed development in the area. We're also asking to remove the North Boylan NCOD from the 105 North Boylan site. Since 1981, that parcel has been used solely for surface parking. It has not contributed to the character of that overlay district, and so removing it is not going to degrade in any way the existing character of the North Boylan NCOD. Future land use map designates this as office and residential mixed use. Again, we are proposing to keep the base district 20X. We are within the central business district, the downtown area of the urban form map, which calls for that urban style frontage, again, consistent with the urban limited that's requested. And this property is within the quarter-mile radius of Raleigh Union Station. The 20 stories that are requested is consistent with the equitable development around transit's recommendation to concentrate density around the city's planned transit stations. A portion of this property is within the downtown transition area, but again, with the urban limited frontage, the building, the height is going to be concentrated at the corner of Boylan and Hillsborough Street. As Ms. Walter mentioned, we have included 3 conditions. 1, use prohibition. The second is the parking deck screening that will apply to the facade facing the church to our west. And the third is the requirement to install a public art installation, either a mural or 3D installation at the corner of North Boylan and Hillsborough. Again, this request is to increase the height to 20 stories to take advantage of the proximity to the downtown core and to Raleigh Union Station. It is consistent with the comprehensive plan. It's compatible with existing and proposed development in this area, and thus is reasonable and in the public interest. Happy to answer any questions that you have this evening. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions? Councilmember Cox?
So when you say it's compatible with the other buildings in the area, how tall are the other buildings in the area?
The existing buildings south of Hillsborough Street, I believe, are zoned for 12 stories, and there is 12-story zoning to our northwest. The area right here is being rezoned for 20 stories as well. So again, significant redevelopment in this western corridor on the edge of the downtown district.
May I ask who's the owner of the property?
Williams Cross Realty.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions? Okay, I am going to close the hearing. Do we have a motion?
Be my motion to approve. I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated October 4th, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action. This approval is also deemed an amendment to the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Councilmember Cox? Opposed? Next, we have rezoning Z122, Hillsborough Southwest Street.
Yes, ma'am. This is the 400 block of Hillsborough Street, West Morgan and Harrington, just northwest of where we are, a little bit closer to the Capitol Square than the case we just looked at, and on the south side of Hillsborough. So the request here is to rezone right at an acre from DX20 with shopfront frontage to DX40 with shopfront frontage and conditions. This is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map, and the Planning Commission does recommend approval. So here's a look at that site. This is what's here is like the roast grill and explore us, right? A couple of views.
Could you go back, please?
Yes, ma'am.
And the next one?
Sure.
Excuse me. Okay, thank you.
So they've prohibited a handful of uses that would otherwise be allowed in the DX district, which are currently allowed, and they have provided for a public art installation on the site, which is not required by the current general use zoning. The residential and office entitlement increased here with the increase in height, not expecting a significant increase in retail because of the, again, retail typically is limited to ground floor, not by regulation, but by practice. So consistent with a number of policies here, and the Planning Commission recommends approval. What questions could I answer for you before you hear from the applicant?
Have any questions for Bynum? Okay.
You mentioned the retail typically is on a ground floor by practice, but if someone wanted to do 2 levels
Absolutely, they
of
could.
retail, they can.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I am going to open the hearing. No one has signed up to speak in opposition. Mr. Birch?
Thank you. Bynum conveniently left out that this is also home to the Ugly Monkey. Didn't want that to go without saying, but also State of Beer. Michael Birch with Longleaf Law Partners, again, fully consistent in the urban core, most area well served by transit. This is where we want to locate housing in proximity to transit and employment opportunities. So here to address any questions the council may have.
Any questions of Mr. Birch?
So, as Flores is a renter in this current space right now?
That's correct.
All right. And I know they're trying to get one big site, but
That's right.
Right now they're
Which
renting.
I believe they, might have closed on it, yeah.
Okay. I am going to close the hearing. Do we have a motion?
It's my lucky night. My motion to approve. I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated October 4th, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action.
Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Wait. Mr. Birch.
His lucky night.
So first I was confused because I'm sorry, Mayor. There was, Roast Grill was in it, which is on the other side of the street. Is it not?
Mm-mm.
It's on the same street?
Same
Okay, but then you said it was State of Beer. And I think I need to recuse myself,
Well, I think they just have a leasehold.
right? They're
leasehold
not owners,
interest.
but
That's right.
they are a current
Tenant.
in that space. There's no, yes, they are, it's just a business in that space. I still would like to recuse myself just to make things super
I move for
absolutely
approval
clear.
of recusal.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, that was unanimous, clerk. All right, now we will vote. You've already stated this. It's been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that was unanimous with Mayor Pro Tem Stewart recused. Thank you. All right, next we have Z122 Pleasant Valley Road.
Yes, ma'am. This is a request to rezone just under 19 acres from commercial mixed use with the 3-story height limit and conditions. And a portion of the area is also commercial mixed use 3-story with parking limited frontage. The entirety of the area would go to commercial mixed use 5-story with a parking limited frontage and consistent and conditions. This is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map. However, it is inconsistent with the urban form map, and Planning Commission recommends approval. So this is sort of the northernmost portion of the Pleasant Valley Shopping Center on the north side of Glenwood Avenue. The site itself is on the south side of Pleasant Valley and has no frontage on Glenwood. A couple of views of the site from Pleasant Valley Road and from inside the shopping center looking north. So they've prohibited some uses here, and then they have also provided a trip budget. So they are limiting their entitlement in relationship to the amount of traffic that they generate. So what that means is that the residential unit entitlement goes up modestly, as does the office square footage and the retail square footage. Pleasant Valley is designated as an urban thoroughfare, and a parking limited frontage would be consistent with the plan here, and they have not offered that. But it is consistent with the plan overall. And the density transition policy here, given the residential on the north side of Pleasant Valley, the request is not consistent with that. Nonetheless, Planning Commission recommends approval. What questions could I answer for you before you open the hearing?
Do we have any questions of Bynum? Okay. I am going to open the hearing. We have people here to speak in support and one person to speak in opposition. Worth Mills is here to speak on behalf of the applicant.
Good evening again, Mayor, members of council, Worth Mills, Longleaf Law Partners. I'm joined by representatives with Kimco Realty LP. This is a rezoning that's going to help revitalize the Pleasant Valley Shopping Center and is part of an overall plan to modernize and bring this shopping center into a true mixed-use development. So the rezoning request includes 3917 and 4001 Pleasant Valley Road, and portions of 6204 and 6250 Glenwood Avenue, totaling about 18.5 acres. Again, this rezoning is going to increase the allowable building height to 5 stories and rezone the entire assemblage to a parking limited frontage to facilitate future multifamily redevelopment with the ability to have ground floor retail beneath that. The request is consistent with the future land use map and the comprehensive plan overall. So the property subject to the rezoning is outlined in blue. The area within that blue outline currently is Dick's Sporting Goods, Five Below, Dollar Tree, and various personal service uses closer to the Pleasant Valley Road and Glenwood Avenue intersection. The Town Ridge Shopping Center, which includes the Walmart, is further up Glenwood Avenue to the north. The Summerwood townhomes are located across Pleasant Valley Road, and then Brookhaven and Devlin Park neighborhoods are to our east. Most of the properties along Glenwood Avenue have a base CX zoning district. There are parcels across Glenwood Avenue zoned up to 7 stories today. Adjacent zoning districts across Pleasant Valley Road is R10. The Devlin Avenue neighborhood is zoned R4. Future land use map designates this property and the rest of the shopping center as community mixed use, so CX is consistent with that recommendation. The majority of the property is within a frequent transit area, and a portion of Pleasant Valley Road is designated as an urban thoroughfare. With this property being both within a frequent transit area and adjacent to a low-density neighborhood, Table LU2 of the 2030 Comprehensive Plan recommends a maximum height of 5 stories, and thus the rezoning is consistent with the height guidance provided in the Comprehensive Plan. I'll note as well that any development of 5 stories is going to be subject to the neighborhood transition requirements of Section 3.5 as it relates to those single-family homes of which we share a common boundary line. Again, this request would help modernize, revitalize the existing Pleasant Valley Shopping Center and is based on this larger plan to redevelop the entire center over time. Again, based on the foregoing information, this request is reasonable and in the public interest. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Okay. Can we stop the clock, please? Do we have any questions? Councilmember Branch?
With this new height, I'm wondering still as far as stormwater, because this area, a lot of that flood goes across Glenwood and there's a lot of flooding kind of in the area. Is stormwater, how's that being addressed?
So when we went to our first neighborhood meeting, we heard from residents who live on April Lane, which is this street here, that there was some flooding occurring during heavy rains. The representatives from Kimco, Lee Johnson, Greg Reed, who are here today, met with that neighbor. They're working to resolve that existing issue. This shopping center was redeveloped prior to the city implementing robust stormwater regulations. And so I expect upon redevelopment, they're going to see a marked improvement in stormwater treatment and retention in this area.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, if we could put the timer on 8 minutes, we have Stephen Isaacs, who would like to speak in opposition.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Stephen Isaacs. My wife Jessica and I have lived at 5809 Devlin Avenue for the last 28 years. We've seen a lot of growth in Devlin Park and in Raleigh as well over that time. We're not opposed to growth or progress for that matter, so long as it makes sense and it doesn't negatively affect the neighbors. Number one concern regarding this rezoning case is the increase in traffic. The proposed zoning changes would allow up to 5 stories of mixed-use development, including 4 stories of higher density residential use. There are only 3 traffic approaches around this collection of parcels: Glenwood Avenue, Pleasant Valley Road, and Devlin Avenue. My neighbors and I on Devlin Avenue are already dealing with adjacent residential areas zoned as high as R10, as well as commercial truck traffic transiting our neighborhood on Devlin Avenue as a shortcut between Pleasant Valley and Glenwood. Devlin is not like Pleasant Valley or Glenwood. It's small, hilly, 2-lane neighborhood road with many driveways over those blind hills fronted by mostly third-of-an-acre lots. The volume and speed of traffic, especially during rush hours, makes it difficult to exit your driveway in a car without a near miss, not to mention the danger to try to walk, run, ride a bike, exercise a dog along the road without sidewalks. We're currently 43rd on a list of traffic calming streets yet to be addressed. Currently, none on the list are funded for any traffic calming devices. Adding more traffic to this road makes no sense to me at this point. I see nothing in the rezoning application or addendum which addresses the mitigation of the additional traffic. Other concerns, as Commissioner Branch mentioned, stormwater collection and noise. Several of my neighbors have experienced flooding from the current stormwater runoff, as well as we have all had to deal with mosquitoes from the current runoff ponds, which collect water and do not absorb the drain water properly. We also hear dumpsters behind the current shopping center being emptied between 3 and 4 a.m. every Monday morning. With the approval of higher density residential, there certainly will be a need for more waste removal and will result in much more associated noise. Last concern is of the height of CX5, which will go as high as 80 feet, which is well above the current consistent heights of most of the commercial development of 2 to 3 stories in the area. The few mature trees that we have between the current shopping center and the neighborhood will be at risk, and that will just further erode what little bit of sound buffer and water absorption that currently exists. Without further communication as to what mitigation standards they might include, I would just respectfully request that you don't approve the request at this time, and that we talk about it further. I appreciate your time.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Could you have someone from Transportation address Mr. Isaac's concerns on the traffic, or just respond to those if possible? Thank you.
I'm not sure what question I'm being asked. And Jason Myers of Transportation.
So talk about what is the estimated increase in traffic on that side of the development?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. As Bynum said earlier, there's a condition that provides a trip budget that avoided the need to do a TIA at this stage. It basically said that we're not allowed to build any more than we could build with the current zoning in terms of the ability to generate new trips. So there's some capacity in the land to build more things on the existing zoning, and they're limited to what that trip generation would be. That doesn't mean there wouldn't be a TIA required at a site plan submittal. There often is because of the increase of a use or a change in terms of understanding how driveways can be made safer and understand what mitigations might be necessary. But from the standpoint of a rezoning case, we're looking as if the infrastructure is sufficient for a change in entitlement. And from the traffic standpoint, there's no change of entitlement.
Okay, thank you. And also, I think the point Mr. Isaac makes that we do need to figure out a way to increase our traffic calming activities and program, as well as sidewalk program on this issue. Thank you. Mr. Mills, do you have any response as the representing the applicant on the traffic issue in particular?
Yes, sir. Travis Flewitt, Kimley Horn, is available, who has worked on this rezoning with us during the entire process and can speak on the routes that we foresee people using to get in and out of this site. Sure.
Good evening, Travis Flewitt with Kimley Horn and Associates, 421 Fayetteville Street, Suite 600. Again, a traffic study has not been done for this yet. As Jason was saying, it's very possible one could be required at site plan. I would anticipate there would be existing buildings that would be replaced, so it's just going to depend on the difference in trips between what buildings are replaced with what is proposed. However, as for the concern about Devlin Avenue, this site does not have any direct access to Devlin Avenue. There are multiple access points onto Pleasant Valley Road and as well as Glenwood, including a full movement signal on Glenwood. So I would not expect any reason why traffic from this development would need to use Devlin Avenue or would use Devlin Avenue. I certainly understand his concern about it being a cut through. It definitely does cut the corner between Pleasant Valley and Glenwood, but I would not expect any of this site traffic to use it unless it was from a resident on Devlin going to or from this site.
Thank you. Mr. Mills, one question on buffering. Just trying to see different uses. Do you have any plans for buffering on that backside up there?
And just so we're clear, are we talking about this area here?
I think that's residential.
So
that's the only spot you're hitting residential.
That's right. So there are I believe three single-family homes that are adjacent to this site. We haven't included any conditions on buffering above and beyond what the code would require for a building above 3 stories. So again, the development, if it exceeds 3 stories, is going to be subject to the neighborhood transition requirements, which includes a Zone A, which varies from 10 feet to 50 feet, depending on the type of separation used, whether it's a fence wall or some forested area. There's also that Zone B area where we have a prohibition on uses and a prohibition on building placement, and then Zone C, which begins at 50 feet to 100 feet from the shared boundary line, which limits height to, I believe, 3 stories at a 45-degree angle up until 100 feet. Structure cannot be more than 40 feet at the beginning of that Zone C line. And so we are relying on the neighborhood transition requirements within the code to effectively buffer from those adjacent single-family homes.
Councilmember Cox.
Just to follow up on those comments, the area, I'm looking at the map right now, and the area next to April Place is really quite small. And the perimeter is really quite large. And so it would be nice if you could work with the neighbors to provide maybe something that goes above and beyond what's required in the code to provide some additional buffering there regarding height. Maybe step it down more right in that general area. you got a lot of land there, a lot to play with. And it seems to me that you can make really good neighbors by meeting with the neighbors and doing something in that little spot that's up there in the corner of, behind April Place, just off of Pleasant Valley Road.
This area?
Yes.
And again, I believe that the neighborhood transition requirements are going to prohibit us from putting any building within 50 feet of that shared boundary line. And even at that 50-foot line, the height is going to be limited to 40 feet, which
I
is...
I understand, but obviously the neighbors are concerned about that. And it sounds to me like there hasn't really been good discussion to come to agreement about what should be developed in that area.
Understood. Thank you.
How many neighborhood meetings were held?
We held 2. The first one, I believe, was back when we were operating under virtual meetings. The second one we held at the Pleasant Valley Shopping Center. And I believe the second one we had maybe 15 to 20 attendees. I'd have to go back and look and see what the first one attendance was.
What issues were brought up at that time, and what did you do to resolve them?
So it was primarily traffic was what we heard. We did hear from Mr. Isaacs about the traffic that was occurring on Devlin Avenue, and I think a focus of that traffic issue was on delivery truck traffic or larger vehicles that have used Devlin Avenue to get either to Glenwood or to Pleasant Valley. Like I said, at the first neighborhood meeting, we did hear about this existing stormwater issues, and Greg and Lee with Kimco Realty went and met with that homeowner, worked with them to rectify that situation. And so I think the applicant has tried to be responsive to neighborhood comments where we can be.
So I was just going to say, trucks on the road is a very different issue than what we're dealing with here. So I'm just going to ask staff if they can look into that as a separate issue, because we do have roads where truck traffic is not allowed. So I'm just going to say that's a separate issue.
And that has been a constant issue on this road. So that is something we need to look at separately.
Madam Mayor, I've seen in the past zoning conditions that also talk to the placement of trash receptacles, to keep them a certain distance away from residential. And I don't see any such conditions here. That was a concern of the neighbor. And I guess, if my request would be to take a look at both of those things, heights and certainly the placement of trash receptacles and maybe even the hours of operation of collecting the trash, particularly when it's near the residential areas.
Do we have any more questions? Okay, I'm going to close the hearing. Councilmember Knight and then Melton.
Just keep these questions and responses in mind and continue to work with the neighbors on this as well as staff as you move through this process. This is the type of mixed-use revitalization that we need and want, and so I'm excited about the prospects of what you can do, especially with that underutilized surface parking to go away and use it more efficiently for mixed use with residential as well as commercial and retail. So with that, Madam Mayor, I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated October 4, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed?
I'm going to vote no because I really think we needed some additional time to try to work out the differences between the neighbors and the developer. We need something better than just a good faith effort, and so I'm voting no.
Okay, we're going to look at the truck traffic and try to address that specific issue for you. Okay, thank you. All right, next we have rezoning Z122 Harrington Street.
Yes, this is a request to rezone just over 1/10 of an acre on the west side of Harrington Street, south of Cabarrus, north of Lenore. And the request would go from DX5 with an urban limited frontage to DX20 with that same frontage and conditions. This is consistent with the comprehensive plan and with the future land use map, and Planning Commission did recommend approval. So this is an aerial view of the site. You can see we're west of the railroad and Red Hat here, and just north of the Fairweather, which faces on Harrington, Lenore, and west. So street side view of the site here. They've offered some conditions here. So they've prohibited some uses. They've provided some guarantees if a building is more than 5 stories. They've provided for a structural survey of the Fairweather. They've provided for vibration monitoring sensors along the property line with the Fairweather. And so the net effect here is an increase in the maximum number of units, an increase in the office square footage, and again, retail tied to that ground floor building footprint. Consistent with the plan overall. Inconsistent here, really looking at so downtown West Gateway, never imagined downtown Raleigh would be as tall as it is. And then looking at infill compatibility, the relationship there to the Fairweather. Again, the Planning Commission recommends approval. Be happy to answer questions for you before you hear from the applicant. And I think you also have some neighbors here who want to speak about the case.
Do you have any visuals that we could compare this to? This is a small lot, and I think that's what I keep hearing. Is there another visual downtown that you can show us?
You mean a lot this small that's zone 20 stories? Is that what you're asking? Or
Just what this might look like?
I can do some work on that while you hear from the applicant.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions for Bynum? Okay. I'm going to open the hearing. We have 5 people here to speak in support, 1 in opposition. Mr. Mills, you're a busy man tonight.
When it rains, it pours, your mayor. Good evening. Worth Mills, Longleaf Law Partners, on behalf of Vista Real Estate, CJ Mann. I'm joined by John Grice, structural engineer with Giles Flythe Engineers in Raleigh, Jonathan Best, development manager with Samet Corporation, and Veronica Creech, VP of Economic Development and External Engagement at St. Augustine's University. This rezoning from DX5 Urban Limited to DX20 Urban Limited would continue the overall redevelopment of this downtown Raleigh block within a quarter mile of Raleigh Union Station. We have met with the Fairweather condominium residents and offered zoning conditions that attempt as best as we can to address their concerns. This request is consistent with the future land use map and the comprehensive plan. It is reasonable and in the public interest. This site is located along South Harrington Street, south of the Depot Historic District in southwest downtown. As I mentioned, the Fairweather condominium borders this site to the south and to the west, and the Fairweather Paint Company is immediately north of this site. Ms. Walter showed this photo as well, but here you can see this site in between the Fairweather Paint Company and the Fairweather condominium. And then there are these unpaid parking spaces along South Harrington Street today. The properties on this block are all zoned DX with allowable building heights between 5 to 12 stories. Southeast of this property along West Lenore is a planned 20-story tower. And within this block, a site plan ASR 5520 encompasses this area here for redevelopment of 12 stories along Cabarrus Street with a reduction to 5 stories adjacent to our site. And I say that just to say there is significant redevelopment in this block. The Fairweather is a fairly recent construction, and again, this is a rezoning to facilitate kind of an overall revitalization of this southern Raleigh block. The property is within the central business district, which again, it calls for the most intense and dense development within Raleigh. This site and all properties nearby are within the downtown section of the urban form map, which calls for urban frontage and greater pedestrian mobility. It's also within the frequent transit area, meaning it's within a quarter mile of a planned transit station, and city policies recommend significant development and density within those frequent transit areas to capitalize on the city's bus system. Based on the comprehensive plan table LU2 on recommended height guidance, the maximum height for a property in the central business district and in the frequent transit area is 40 stories. This is the urban form map zoomed out, but on a greater scale. I've highlighted both this property and Raleigh Union Station to show the proximity of those two sites. 520 South Harrington is within walking distance of Russ Bus and the recently started construction of Russ Bus. Building heights of 20 stories further the accessibility and the efficiency of that planned transit station. The zoning conditions that we've offered to date, we have prohibited a number of uses that would not create a vital downtown, such as vehicle repair and fuel sales and pawn shop. We have also submitted 2 zoning conditions after meeting with the Fairweather neighbors after our second neighborhood meeting. One is a vibration study that must be done, or a foundational study that must be done prior to the issuance of any permits. And the second is installing vibration equipment along 3 points of the shared boundary line that must be in operation during all points of construction. I'll turn it over to Veronica Creech for her thoughts as well. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. It's good to be here tonight with you. And to be here on behalf of Dr. Christine Johnson McPhail, our 13th president at St. Augustine's University, our board of trustees, and our full Falcon family of 1,200 students, over 200 faculty and staff, and more than 12,000 alumni. We're especially thrilled to be here in support of this project, given CJ Mann is the first developer that has included SAU in a project in downtown. This project will allow for lifelong learning and learning anywhere for all of Raleigh. Given it will allow for an SAU footprint in our downtown. Additionally, this vision creates missing middle and early career housing desperately needed by our faculty, staff, and students. In economic development, we often talk about the brain drain, like not losing our students when they graduate college. One of the challenges right now among many populations in our region is upon graduation, finding housing that's affordable. This project would allow for us to have our students, our early graduates, our grad students find home right here in Raleigh. Thank you.
Could you explain a little more how that will happen? Okay.
Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. I'm sorry, I got a little cold here I'm dealing with, so please bear with me. I'm going to read through these statements kind of fast. Just want to give a follow-up and add a brief overview of myself and why we are deciding to rezone our property located at 520 South Harrington Street. I'm a Raleigh guy, born and raised. I've literally lived in every district in Raleigh throughout my lifetime, A through E. During the lifeblood of Raleigh, my city, runs through my veins. I love this city as much as anyone who's ever lived here. Over the course of my lifetime, I've witnessed drastic changes with regards to demographics and development types. I understand and appreciate the need for our city to redevelop because of our rapid population growth. But on the other hand, it saddens me to witness the loss of Black-owned businesses and properties within our city due to gentrification and the temptation of monetary gain due to the pressures of redevelopment. Many of the historic African-American owned businesses, churches, community-based organizations, and homes within a quarter-mile radius of our site have been relocated or demolished or out of business due to redevelopment in our district. In fact, the 2 homes that the Fairweather is located on were owned by prominent Black-owned businesses back in the early 1900s. 4 years ago, when we purchased 520 Harrington Street, We wanted to have a downtown presence with our business. We also purchased this property with this rich history in mind. We want to be able to provide services, amenities, programs to the entire community. We also want to be able to develop and revitalize the economic minority community in the downtown area. As Worth stated, we want this to be a mixed-use development with offices on the ground floor, retail above from floors 2 to 3, and residentials from floors 3 and above. We want to host workforce development incubator spaces, as Veronica mentioned. Ideally, we would like to partner with higher education institutions such as Shaw University and St. Augustine's University so they can have a downtown presence with office space, classroom space, and residences for their professional and faculty staff. But all these mentioned programs and uses require density on a site such as ours, which is why we respectfully are asking to be rezoned to downtown mixed use 20 stories. Again, I would like to reiterate that this rezoning request is consistent with the future land use map and the 2020 comp plan. I want to add, I've got a few seconds, but if I could just get an additional 2 minutes, I just want to talk about.
Actually, the time, no, your time is up, CJ. You know how this works. So, but I want an answer to the question I asked. So we're going to end this now.
Okay, so the answer to your question is how do we look for the missing middle housing, right?
No, my question was how can, like, Veronica said that there'll be residents for St. Augustine's, graduates, whatnot. How are we going to assure this?
Oh, through a contract with St. Augustine's, I will offer reduced rents. And I really would like to offer this, and it's damn if you do, damn if you don't. And I'm hearing this throughout the city, and it's a big issue that we're talking about, and it's missing middle housing and affordable housing. And again, it's damn if you do and damn if you don't, because everybody wants affordable housing, everybody wants missing middle housing, but nobody really wants it in their backyard. I'm willing to be one of the first developers in Raleigh to offer that. But in order for us to offer affordable housing and offer missing middle housing, then I would like to exchange that for density and density bonuses on a site such as this. But I am definitely open to, in exchange for height, I'm very open to the requirements of the city in their definition of affordable housing so we can put it on the site.
So are you prepared to offer some type of condition?
If it's the will of the council, yes.
Okay, let's hear from, let me see, one person has signed up to speak in opposition. We may have some additional questions for you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. If we could set the timer to 8 minutes, we have Ann Courteau.
Good evening. Thank you. I am Ann Courteau. I am a resident of the Fairweather, and I am speaking on behalf of the Fairweather residents. I think the most important thing to point out is that we support Mr. Mann. We support the development of this property. We are willing to consider concessions that would go beyond the 5 stories for which it's currently zoned, which, by the way, is actually the consistent UDO and plan. Something 4x times that, 20 stories, is not actually consistent. And if you look at the Planning Commission staff report that was buried in the meeting, they decided that 20 stories would be inconsistent with the current planning. We, as the Fairweather community, would support greater than that. We reached out to Mr. Mann and met with him in July. Wanted to understand the proposals that he had for the property, see how we could work together and support him. We support affordable housing. We support St. Augustine's University. We support all of this. The only question is, how is this feasible? Is this feasible? And forgive me, because I am not a technological guru, so how do I advance these slides while I talk? Thank you. Thank you. Next slide. Next slide. That's perfect. And I think you can go to the next slide. I think what we're dealing with here are the significant constraining circumstances of this plot, which you've heard is described as, by the Planning Commission themselves, as barely 0.1 acre. and it is sandwiched very tightly between the two adjacent properties. And so you can see there what 20 stories might look like. Because the properties, so also it should be known that I understand the development, and of course, those of us that bought into the Fairweather had nothing to do with, we didn't understand the development, we didn't understand, I bought it in February of 2020, right before COVID hit, and then thought I had done the stupidest thing on the face of the planet. But you can see that the development just beyond the property at issue, there are 3 properties that run up to Cabarrus, and those are now all, I think, owned by a single developer who has submitted plans to develop in consistency with the current zoning. So it will be 5 stories up to 12 at the front of Cabarrus, which is a main thoroughfare. Understand, next slide, please. Understand that you have a very small property hedge-penned between 2 buildings. And next slide, please. It runs on a neighborhood street, a narrow neighborhood dead-end street, Harrington. So one of the key questions we have is during the time this is being constructed, first of all, because we can all recognize the need for equipment, the size of the cranes, the size of all of the equipment to do a 20-story building versus a 5 versus a 7 is exponentially greater. And there are 50% of the residents of the Fairweather, next slide please, that have access to their parking deck, P2, that is literally adjacent to this property. It is accessible only via Harrington. And I will tell you, on one of our first meetings with Worth, and by the way, there are procedural defects in this matter. One is that the initial meeting, no one got notice. No one got notice. That is a procedural defect that is challengeable. We don't wish to go there. We want to have a dialogue. We want to make this work for everybody. But a bunch of us attended the second meeting, and what was fascinating is when we raised the idea that this property was accessible only via Harrington, Worth was shocked. What do you mean? It's not accessible via West Street? No, it's not. So how are you proposing to put in a 20-story building when you don't understand the access to develop it? And at that meeting, we asked, what are your plans? Well, we don't have any particular plans. We don't have to. And I understand that for most rezoning cases, you don't have to. But for this rezoning case, you should, because there is no way to ensure the safety and viability of the entire neighborhood unless we better understand what is proposed to be built here and how it is proposed to be built. Next slide, please. One of the key concerns is there are 2 residential units of the Fairweather that are accessible only via Harrington. As we all know, a construction site has tremendously combustible building materials. Has anyone contacted the fire department to ensure that this can be built safely? Forget the excavation. Forget the depth of the excavation that could completely undermine the structural integrity of the Fairweather. And we have had no engineering studies. We've had no traffic studies to understand what is going to happen. What is going to happen to the flow of traffic for a 20-story building where Mr. Mann has himself said that the building will not have sufficient parking to support its inhabitants? Where is that going to go, especially as we continue to develop? Next slide, please. So I think that like I said, the important thing is we would love to see this built. We relish the development of this neighborhood. And if we can do it with all constituencies being on board, that's even better. That's the whole reason all of us move downtown into this warehouse district because it's vibrant, it's growing. We need to be very careful. We need to protect a number of constituencies and make sure they are not displaced. But we need to do it thoughtfully and with information. And that's all we're asking for. Next slide, please. This is the example of some local, this is Cabras and West. This is a development where there was a petition to go to 20 stories. It was denied. It's being developed for 7. And yet it's on 6 acres. It's on main thoroughfares. Next slide, please. And you can see there is traffic coming day and night. I don't know where you put that on a narrow, dead-end neighborhood street. Next slide. So I think that we need to take into consideration the idea that we need more information to make a prudent, rational, reasonable decision about what should be built here that we can all support. Next slide.
Okay, time is up now.
Thank you very much.
So I do have, and before you go, I have a question. If you could come up. I don't know if anybody else has any questions.
Yeah.
So you said that you support this. I guess your concern is 20 stories.
Correct.
So
correct.
What is what are you comfortable with?
So the problem is, I don't think we know without further information. So we think there will need to be setbacks, screens, other things, but we don't even know what to request until we have further information from engineering traffic studies, because we want to support the reasonable, best, and highest use of this property. But we're kind of hamstrung right now, right? We could tell you that out of the gate, you know, to me, off the cuff, I don't understand how there's more than 7 here. Could I be convinced ever otherwise? Certainly. But I need information. I need to understand, and we all need to understand. How is that going to be done safely for the benefit of the entire community? If the studies show 12, okay. I think we could get on board with that. But I'm not, and I don't want to speak out of turn. I'm speaking myself at this point. I'm not speaking on behalf of the entire community. My point is nobody has enough information to know what's really feasible here. And that's all we're asking for.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Knight.
Yes, ma'am. Who are you speaking on behalf of? Is it a homeowners, the Fairview? I mean, is it?
I am a resident of the Fairweather. I happen to be a lawyer, not a land use lawyer, but as some folks know, I get sometimes pulled into things because I'm a lawyer. I think I speak generally on behalf of the Fairweather community, but I want to be clear that I am not representing everyone in a binding context.
And how many units are in the Fairweather?
I think 45, is that right? 45, yeah, 45. Okay.
If you're here from the Fairweather, could you just raise your hand so we can? Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Councilmember Melton.
Oh.
Don't run away yet.
Okay.
I don't know who your question is for, but.
I don't know either. And it may just be sort of an observation that, you know, first, we run into issues like this a lot downtown, where there's a building that's constructed in our downtown area, and then there's a plan for a building nearby, and then there's concern of, sometimes the sense we get is we were here first, we don't want another tall building near us.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm encouraged actually a bit, because that's not really the approach y'all are taking. Right now, they could build something that's going to be taller than the building you live in.
I told Mr. Mann I would support 20 stories. If I had a pool, I could come visit. Right. So.
and I have talked to some folks in the Fairweather, and some of the, yeah, right.
That's just me personally, but
right.
Yes. Okay. But no, we're not.
Right.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to say, I'm start with the positive there. That's encouraging to me. And I have talked to some folks in the Fairweather, and the concern about where will the crane go? Where will the construction material go? How can we access the garage on this street that has no only one ingress egress point. I've talked to Mr. Mann and his attorney about these issues, and I had hoped that there would be some clarification for this hearing, maybe some sense of certainty. And I'm under the impression, I think, that city staff has to address that issue. But I just wanted to throw out there that I appreciate the fact that the initial concern is this building is going to be taller than ours, don't let it happen. And because we hear that a lot. And so I think some of what we're hearing today, I think, can be worked through with our staff, because obviously y'all need access to your garage and you need access to your building.
And we need to make sure our building doesn't sink into the ground with excavation. But
Reasonable
yes.
concerns. And so
Yeah,
that would
it's
be one thing
it's a little concern, just a little concern.
that would be one thing I wanted to flag for staff. If there's any, what is the response to that? Because quite frankly, some of what you're asking about these really detailed plans, I don't think they're going to have that until they know what they're allowed to build there, because it takes time and money to construct those plans. But I think some of these concerns about how will this practically work on site, I think that should be addressed.
And I appreciate that. I do think that this is one of the cases that may need to be not cart before the horse. It may not be an appropriate, it's not a ripe rezoning matter, in my opinion. It is, you can rezone certain things in a vacuum, right? I mean, Lenore, Dawson, South Saunders, that got rezoned to 20 stories. That's on almost 2 acres at major thoroughfares. That is a very different situation. All we're saying is the circumstances surrounding this particular development are mind-bogglingly different than pretty much any other rezoning case. And we should be analyzing it to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to facilitate Mr. Mann's development while protecting the safety of the Fairweather. That's it, and being consistent.
Councilmember Branch.
So I have a question actually for staff from piggyback off of Councilman Milton. What is our policy on access to existing buildings? Because this is a dead-end street.
Sure. So I've had a lot of conversation. We've had a lot of conversation with transportation actually about this issue throughout the life of the case. And frankly, I'd really rather defer to transportation than to speak on their behalf. Great.
He's behind you.
I'm Jason Myers in transportation. I reached out to my colleague who supervises the team of inspectors who follow development and make sure that things are done safely and to code, and that when we accept infrastructure, it's built the way we'd like it to be built. Some of the things that he said, just looking at the site briefly, that would be a part of this sort of thing would be to require full access and egress from the parking garage at all times for the neighboring property. There may be very short periods of time, the flagging or things like that, but otherwise, safe access and egress for pedestrians, and that if they applied for a sidewalk closure, there would have to be infrastructure installed to get people safely to a different sidewalk to go around that. Maintain an open travel lane at all times for emergency vehicles. He mentioned noise restrictions and limit night work potentially. And then this last one is kind of specific, but I think it might be important. Developer responsible to provide a public information packet that can be distributed to residents of the Fairweather and others in the immediate vicinity that may be impacted by construction, traffic, et cetera. And I gather that's a standard practice, and that's something I have personal experience with, and hopefully it answers some of the questions related to transportation. The building inspection stuff, I think Director Young might be able to answer those.
I have a follow-up on that. So would those be zoning conditions they would include, or is that when that would be
Those
from
are
the
things
city
staff does to protect the health, safety, and welfare and the public and maintain our public right-of-way for public use in all cases. Now, this is a very challenging and different site, so it's going to be a little bit more difficult to do that, and it's going to be maybe more difficult construction because there's only one way in and one way out for vehicles on Harrington. But these are the sorts of things we do on all site developments, and especially in a constrained environment like downtown Raleigh.
Okay. I'm going to ask if we could get Worth back up here. You've heard some of the concerns mentioned. I feel like that there needs to be some additional work done here. you willing to continue to meet with the neighbors and see if we can resolve this?
We are. And in addition to the comments from city staff, I did want to mention that John Grice with Giles Flythe, who helped with the drafting of the conditions 2A and 2B that relate to structural integrity, both pre-development and during construction. He's available tonight if you have any questions for him. Jonathan Best with Samick Corp. Is also in attendance tonight. He's been working with us over the last couple of months to create or think through how this site could be managed from a construction perspective in terms of storage of materials and ensuring continuous vehicular and pedestrian access for the Fairweather folks. So if there are any questions for those two individuals, they are here to answer those questions. And again, we are willing to continue to work on this case and continue to listen to neighbors.
Councilmember Melton?
I was just going to add that I don't think it's ready for today, and I'm not sure that us asking those questions is going to be productive, but it may be helpful if you could make those folks available to the Fairweather residents to ask the questions or get a better understanding the next time you engage with them, if that's what you're planning to do, because I think that may help.
Councilmember Cox?
Yeah, and I'm going to speak to the elephant in the room, which is height, and say that I really think that 20 stories on such a small footprint is absolutely absurd. And
Excuse me.
that when you have those conversations, that you not just talk about, you know, the engineering nuances of building such a tall building on such a small site, but actually talk seriously about reducing the height of this project.
Understood. Thank you.
And also, is there a way, because I think it'd be helpful if when you all have questions, if they have, for them questions, is there a way for them to contact you all so when y'all go into your meeting, you know, you all can send questions ahead of time. That way y'all can start off kind of productive from the very beginning. I think as long as they have that contact information, that'd be a good step in prep of your meeting. And I figure we'll have this back in 2 weeks.
Mayor Pro Tem Stewart?
I didn't know if you wanted to follow back up with your request earlier to Ms. Walters about examples.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
I want to get to some resolution first. I think Councilmember Branch said coming back in 2 weeks. I think this might take longer than 2 weeks. Councilmember Fort, your thoughts?
Yes, I was going to ask to hold it open when we close, when we got to the end, but.
Yeah, I'm going to leave this hearing open, but my question is this. Coming back in 2 weeks, that's a very quick turnaround, and I'm going to ask you, but also Worth, if we brought this back that first week, what would it be now? November 1st. Do you think does that cause any hardships? I'm looking at you having enough time to actually bring something back that.
Right, I understand, and that gives us time to set up and organize a meeting and then respond to those comments again. I think November 1st will work for our team, and like you said, give us time to draft conditions, get them to staff for review, and make sure that we have a productive meeting the next time that we're back in front of you all.
What I don't want to do is have this come back in 2 weeks and we're still where we are.
Right.
Councilmember Fort, are you?
Yeah, I'm agreeable to that. I think November works.
Okay, I'm going to leave this open. I think you've heard from us. I think additional meetings with the neighborhood is necessary, and I think we need to address some of the issues that were raised in a more clear-cut way, especially regarding, access to their garage and safety issues, whatnot.
Right. I think some of that too will just be getting that information to the residents, because as Mr. Meyer said, that's going to be something that we're going to be required to show in order to get ASR or building permits or anything where there's substantial, improvements on the site. So we'll do our due diligence and make sure that that meeting's productive and the next meeting that we have is as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. All right, next we have Z3522, Crest Road, Varsity Drive, and College View Avenue. Michael Birch. No one has signed up in opposition.
Yes, ma'am. This is a request to rezone just over 4 acres from R10 with the Special Residential Parking Overlay District to RX7 with an urban limited frontage and conditions. This is on the west side of Varsity between Crest and College View. So we're south of Western Boulevard, west of Avent Ferry, so south of the University and west of Centennial. This is consistent with the comprehensive plan overall and the future land use map, and also the Planning Commission recommends approval. So you can see this is largely residential adjacent to what sometimes is referred to as NCSU South Campus or the Greek Village. A couple of views from the street. They have prohibited the cemetery use as their sole condition here. And the entitlement change here is largely an increase in residential units. So the residential mixed-use district would allow a limited amount of commercial space, either office or retail, in the ground floor unit, corner ground floor unit at the intersection of 2 public streets, which could conceivably be achieved here. So that's the limit on the non-residential use there. Consistent with the plan overall, called out about reinforcing the urban power.
It's late. It's
pattern,
late.
reinforcing the urban pattern, just recognizing the residential scale, otherwise residential scale nearby, but they have offered and there's no frontage here. Nonetheless, Planning Commission recommends approval, and I'm happy to answer questions before you open the hearing and hear from the applicant.
Do we have any questions for Bynum? Okay, like I said, no one has signed up in opposition. I'll open the hearing. Michael Birch is here to speak on behalf of the applicant.
Yes, and here to address any questions the council may have.
Anybody have any questions? Okay, I'm going to close the hearing. Do we have a motion?
I think this is my last one of the night.
I was going to say, this is your night.
Motion to approve. I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated October 4th, 2022, containing the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. That was unanimous, clerk. All right, the next is rezoning Z3622, 1801 Lynn Road.
Yes, ma'am. This is a request to rezone just under an acre from R4 to R6. This is the southwest corner of Lynn and Ben Burr. It's a general use request. There are no conditions. It is consistent with the future land use map as well as the comprehensive plan overall, and the Planning Commission does recommend approval. So you can see this is just west of Lynn Road Elementary School, east of Commercial on Creedmoor. A couple of views of the site. So there's a view from Ben Burr, which is a side street off Lynn Road. Residential entitlement here would increase from roughly 8 to 14 units, and the setbacks would be reduced across the board. This is consistent with the comprehensive plan overall. No inconsistent policies were identified, and the Planning Commission recommends approval. I believe the applicant and neighbors in opposition are both here to speak to you.
Yes. We have, well, first off, any questions for Bynum? And by the way, Bynum, I haven't forgotten your work. We'll get to that at the end.
On example?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
All right. So we have Daniel Smoot here speaking in support.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I'm the owner of the property and the applicant. Just want to point out that Lynn Road has limited access, so we can't get a driveway permit from DOT. It's a DOT road. So the site is vacant, and it's a great opportunity to create additional housing for Raleigh. that would be what I call attainable housing, not affordable, but it would be attainable. And the difficulty with this site is access. So a rezoning request from R4 to R6 would allow us to have different setbacks and a different approach or a different orientation to have that access more from Benbur Road than from Lynn Road. So while it is a corner lot and you think, hey, this is an acre in North Raleigh, what can we do with it? It does have that constraint, and that's why we asked for the rezoning to R6. I'd point out that it's consistent with the future land use map. It's consistent with the comprehensive plan. We concur with Bynum's presentation and staff's presentation, Hannah Reckhouse presentation to the Planning Commission back in August. The Planning Commission approved it unanimously. We're very excited to, again, imagine what you could do with an acre that's vacant. And we're very excited that Council has recently passed some of these missing middle reforms, we'll call them, that would increase the variety and kind and also density available on the site. And we respectfully ask for your consideration in passing the rezoning. But I'd also point out that we held a neighborhood meeting that was well attended, and I have met on site many times with the adjacent neighbors, and we do have support from several of the immediate neighbors to the site, and I'm always happy to talk to people and answer their questions. So I feel like we've had a good dialogue in that sense with the neighbors. So thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions of the applicant? Councilmember Branch?
How many units are you thinking about?
We do not have a specific plan of development yet. We did hold a sketch plan review with the city for a cottage court concept, and that's when we encountered the driveway access issue with Lynn Road and started to think about it again as a rezoning case. But we don't have a specific plan of development yet, but we would like to do something that would be consistent with the missing middle reforms. And again, that's delivering attainable housing that isn't large lot, $800,000 to $1 million houses. It's my nephew went to the elementary school right down the street, Lynn Road Elementary. His mom lives in an apartment. I'm sure she would like to live in a house, but it needs to have a small enough footprint in order for that to be affordable for her.
So you're looking at cottage courts potentially?
Potentially, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Right, we have two people here to speak in opposition, Robert Cowperthwaite and Jack Carpenter.
I guess we're the people you all have been waiting for all night. A person much wiser than I once said, the last shall be first and the first shall be last. So I appreciate your staying awake to hear us.
Please, Ralph.
I've had numerous conversations with Daniel. By the way, my name is Jack Carpenter, and I live on Jean Drive. Our conversations have been pleasant, and I don't really have a concern with plans to better utilize the property in question. I live at my property is at the southwest corner of his property. All of the surface water from his property drains into my yard. In addition to that, all the water from Lynn Road, from just east of Ben Burr to west of Jean Drive and about 200 yards back up into Hidden Valley, also drains to Lynn Road and ultimately into my backyard, because there's a drainage ditch just west of his property and it dumps right into my yard. So you see, I'm concerned about impervious surfaces. That drainage was not an issue when Lynn Road was a little country 2-lane paved road with grass shoulders and ditches on both sides. But it's now a 5-lane paved street with sidewalks on both sides, which has increased the stormwater tremendously. And I'm just hoping that you all can offer this fine gentleman some guidance to better utilize that property without drowning me. That's my prayer and my plea. And my councilman isn't here tonight, so I'm an orphan.
No, you're not. We got you.
So I'm appealing to your sense of fairness, and I appreciate your time and attention.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Is Robert Copenwaith here? Okay. Well, Mr. Carpenter, thank you for that. So I have a question, staff, just related to stormwater and impervious surface. Could you address Mr. Carpenter's concerns?
Yeah, so this property is 0.99 acres, so it falls under the small lot provisions, which would limit the percent imperviousness, but not require specific stormwater controls. There is a drainage swale, as Mr. Carpenter mentioned, that goes along the property line between the rezoned property as well as his property that goes due south. It doesn't go toward his house, but it goes parallel to the property line. So there would be an impervious surface requirement.
Okay, so how do we address his concern, I guess?
So the concern would be addressed during the development review process, and as part of that process, our plan reviewers make sure that the drainage is going in the same direction and exiting so that it would not cause any additional direction of flow that isn't currently there. That's the provisions that we look for.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smoot, you wanted to say something?
I've spoken with Mr. Carpenter about the water issue because it's really not the impervious surface on my site. It's the culvert that exists underneath Lynn Road that is bringing stormwater from the north side of Lynn Road back towards his backyard. When we initially approached staff about developing this site, they'd identified that drainage way as being a noose riparian buffer. So what do you do with a noose riparian buffer? We disagreed with that, and actually it was an error, it was a mistake. So that drainage way from Lynn Road is not buffered, subject to the noose riparian buffers, and we got a determination letter from the state stating that. So, I'd be happy to work with Mr. Carpenter to better channelize and direct that off-site water from, if it goes by my site, by his yard, because he does have now stormwater in Jean Drive. And really what he needs to figure out a way to do is to get stormwater from, that's coming from Lynn Road, going through my property, going through his property, back into the storm system of Jean Drive. So, as I said, I'm also happy to work with staff to comply with all the impervious surface requirements for my site, but we want to be a good neighbor to him, and let's solve this water problem because, I understand when it rains, you've got all this off-site water that's coming on him. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Can I have a question, please? A comment?
Hold on one second. Let me get to the rest of the council members. Mr. Carpenter, Mr. Branch.
Questions for staff. Ben Burr Road, is it curb and gutter with stormwater inlets? the second part of that, if so, is there a way to connect?
Apologize for the delay. Jason Myers of Transportation. I do believe it has a form of curb and gutter. It does not have storm drainage in the northern part of the street. There are some inlets further south beyond this site. I'm looking at my screen here and see a culvert maybe 150 feet south of this site and two inlets. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
We're on Google Earth now. There's not.
Councilmember Cox?
So for staff, about impervious surface, under this, if we go to R6 with the missing middle allowances, how much of the site can be impervious surface?
I don't know.
I'd have to confirm that, but the fact that it would go be a cottage court does not change the impervious surface versus the other normal. The rezoning would not change the maximum percent impervious surface for this lot.
And what is that maximum percent?
I'd have to go look that up. I can do that and come right back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Melton?
Well, I had a question on how to frame it, but the sort of the discussion that we had here with the applicant about working to make sure that the water is improved from the condition it's at today, does that need to be a zoning condition, or is that something that's going to be required as part of the permitting and site plan approval? I guess that's my question. Should I repeat it?
It's a general use rezoning.
So is there going to be any stormwater controls that are required at site plan, or the promise that was sort of made here on the record, is that separate and apart?
Because this falls under the small lot provisions, there's not a specifically stormwater control detention requirement. It would just be the percent imperviousness limit.
Okay.
So if the applicant wanted to offer the 2 and 10-year control, he could do that, but that would have to come through zoning conditions.
I see. Yeah.
Has that been discussed?
I think it also depends on what exactly it is that we build. So for instance, under missing middle changes, let's say that we develop this as townhomes. We're going to have to do stormwater control for townhomes. They don't have the same exemption as small lot, single family detached, or say what a cottage court would have. So it really depends on what it is we wind up doing. But all of that is addressed in, at site plan, or, when we apply to do exactly what it is that we think is feasible for the site. The question about stormwater in Ben Burr, the site drains towards Mr. Carpenter, so really figuring out a way to get that stormwater into Gene Drive makes the most sense, not into Ben Burr. And all of that is off-site to us, and I don't think it would, my solutions are, it would be very simple to create a path for that water to go. And, I'd be happy to work with Mr. Carpenter to do that. But it really depends on what it is we wind up doing for the site.
I hope it's cottage courts.
That would be a really cool idea. I know that there's another cottage court on Gene Drive, actually, at the end of Gene Drive, which is currently a dead-end road. And to my knowledge, it's only the first or second one done in Raleigh, even though cottage courts have been on the books since 2013. So we'd be excited to do a project like that here. And actually, we work with Ross Chapin, who's the founder of Cottage Courts. He wrote the book on cottage courts to come up with our concept plan as a cottage court for this site. So
Okay, thank you. Mr. Carpenter, you wanted to say something?
The property immediately south of ours is just in the process of being developed now. They built 3 houses down there on 9/10 of an acre. The original engineer plans for dealing with this surface water which flows through my backyard, the original plan was to put a pipe and carry that water back to Jean Drive. Once it was cleared, they realized water won't run uphill. So that ditch, which south of me, had to be continued on down past these 3 houses, which they just finished in the property immediately adjacent to us on the south side of our house. So they haven't yet figured out how to make water run uphill. Jean Drive is higher elevation than this area where the water drains off of Lynn Road.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any additional questions?
I was waiting for him.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, so I did clarify that the small lot rules that I was mentioning apply to half an acre. So this lot would require stormwater controls be put in place. I apologize for my mistake.
Okay, well, that just resolved a lot. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to close the hearing.
Well, I would like to ask the gentleman, I mean, this is an important revelation, is that supposedly they would be required to put in stormwater controls. Can you explain what that means? What is a stormwater control?
Yes, sir. That would require that the 2-year and the 10-year storm peak flows post-development would be equal to or less than the 2-year and 10-year peak flows pre-development. So stormwater detention would be required.
Detention, so that's like a detention pond or something of that nature?
Pond, it could be an underground detention storage device as well, sir.
So I was wondering, sir, I mean, does that, meet your requirement regarding stormwater control, that they would be required to put that in?
Would it remain permanent?
Yes.
Yes.
And how much water would be permitted to drain into this sump or this basin which runs through my yard?
Well, I can let them explain it, but my understanding is that these controls would be built so that the water running into your yard after development is no more than what it is today.
If they could do that, if they could assure me that it would not be an increase, I'd have no objection, because I said initially, I want to work with the gentleman.
Okay.
And surface water is, as we know, is always a problem.
Yes, sir.
Every time in the winter when we have icy roads and they put sand and salt, well, that sand and salt, again, washes right down through my yard.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
So we need some help.
Yes, sir.
I think you just got it. Thank you. All right, I'm going to close the hearing. Councilmember Melton?
I think this was a helpful exercise. Sorry we took a little detour, but I'm glad we got to the right result. I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated October 4th, 2022, containing the agenda materials, and to approve the zoning amendment with the adoption and effective dates described in the agenda item under recommended action.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Clerk, that was unanimous. Thank you. Before we end the evening, Bynum, could you provide some examples of what you found?
Sure. And I think they'll be mostly familiar to you. I want to talk about 2 different things. One, small sites with taller buildings in the downtown. And then the other thing I want to talk about is locations where we see big big differences in heights adjacent. So first, a couple of smaller sites that are tall. One is One Exchange Plaza. I spent most of the day there. It's about 10 stories high. The lot is deeper than the Fairweather site, but the width is comparable. And so if you think about half of One Exchange Plaza, you could definitely get the core and some structure there. That building's about 10 stories. Another site with a similar narrow width is 333 Fayetteville Street. That's the northwest corner of Fayetteville and Martin, catty corner from the Sir Walter. It's a very tall, black, modernist building. It's actually older than I am. It's my birthday today.
Happy
thank you.
birthday.
Oh, yeah.
Watch out, we might start
Yeah.
singing to you.
That building is a comparable width to the Harrington Street lot. Again, deeper, so you would expect to see a smaller footprint, but the width, I think, is really the controlling factor in terms of accomplishing something there. And then the third example, which is smaller than both of those, is the Capitol Club building, right? I know you've been to lunch there. I've seen you there. Where Capitol Club 16 is, right there at the corner of Martin and Salisbury. That's actually an example where you have small, tall, adjacent to lower scale development. So if you think about Lucette Grace or King's adjacent to Capitol Club, those are 2-3 stories, which is even smaller than the Fairweather. Capitol Club, I think, is only like 10 or 12. And then a couple of places where we see adjacent heights of significant difference. One existing would be the north and south side of the Dillon. So if you think about the Dillon Tower, which is about 17, the remainder of that building on that site is about 7, and then north across Hargett is also, I think, 6. So that's where an example there. And then you have recently approved a couple of places downtown where we anticipate development at different scales. The Dawson and the Hugh, both at 5 and 7 and 40 stories approved adjacent. And then an even more recent case on the south side of downtown, the approval on the south side of Stronach's Alley for 20 stories adjacent to the Pope House, which is only 3 stories, which is a city-owned and operated public site. So those are just, I think those might feel familiar to you, and happy to bring back more information if that's helpful.
Okay, that was helpful. Councilmember Melton?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest they're all gone, and the case is coming back in a month. We're probably not going to remember any of this, so if this could just go in the agenda back up or
Sure.
something. 'Cause I think
Happy to
we're
do
gonna,
that. Just answering the mayor's question.
I can't see them, but most people left, so we probably,
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be helpful to put them back up, so that would be good. Councilmember Branch, did you have anything? Okay, I just want to make one mention. We have some NC State student government representatives here tonight. They stuck through the entire hearing. So, I just want to ask you to stand up and be recognized. Actually, let's get a photo. Can we get somebody to get a photo? We'll stand, if you'll stand in front here, we'll get behind y'all. Uh-oh, well, let's get somebody good then.
Hey, how are y'all?
I'm like, I wish she has migraines.
I'm short, so I'm going to get here. Come on.
Do you want me to put this in?
You're tall. Oh, yeah, look at she would have been. Oh, I got a couple of pictures. My mother, she would have been 97. October 4th, in my brain.
Well, we have our fee committee
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Is RTN still going?
Okay, bye-bye. I have yet to adjourn the meeting. Hold on.
I still have 50, 60 days.
This is from our NC State friends. They
Thank you.
gave us a note.
No, I'm still living in Raleigh. Oh, our town called
Councilmember Knight? Okay, this is for Councilmember Buffkin. Should I give that to Stacy? Give to him? Okay, everyone. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for hanging in with us.